Do you not understand what we're saying? You really are dim-witted, said my in-laws as they tried to kick me out. I told you time and again not to leech money from our son. Disappear, you parasitic wife. Despite their harsh words, I decided to leave. Arguing seemed pointless. It might be enlightening for you to personally experience who the real parasite is, I murmured to myself. My name is M. I'm a 35-year-old office worker. Tom and I have been married for 3 years. We don't have children yet, but with both of us having incomes, we used to enjoy trips and dining out, cherishing our happy days together. Now that I've transitioned to remote work, I handle household chores, allowing Tom to focus solely on his job. On weekends, he helps around the house, and we've managed to maintain a balanced married life. Tom and I met at a group blind date, and I was drawn to his kind smile instantly. After dating for 2 years, we got married. Even after marriage, Tom has always been incredibly supportive, his smile healing me every day. However, our happy marriage isn't without its challenges, mainly the presence of my in-laws. Tom's family runs a ramen shop that his father started 15 years ago after leaving his office job. The business seems successful with several branches in the city. The first time I met my in-laws, they were dressed in expensive luxury brands, seemingly more for show than genuine choice. To put it bluntly, they seemed nouveau rich. Our first meeting was when we visited them to announce our marriage, and from the start, they seemed to look down on me. Any daughter-in-law is fine as long as she can do housework and doesn't cause trouble, but she does seem to lack fortune, doesn't she? They remarked. I was taken aback by their directness. My husband quickly reprimanded them, and they behaved better afterward. Yet I realized there were people who spoke their minds without a filter. Perhaps it's a trait of restaurant owners, especially ramen shop owners, to be assertive. Thankfully, my husband is always on my side, reassuring me that even if I were to lose my job, we would manage together. Is this version okay, or would you like further adjustments? I wouldn't consider working in a ramen shop, so their words didn't bother me much. Besides, my husband apologized many times for his parents' rude behavior and assured me that we only needed to interact with them during major family events. Apparently, he doesn't get along well with them. I heard that his father had always been stubborn and struggled as a salaried worker. Though kind to my husband, his attitude became arrogant and condescending after his ramen shop became popular. He often meddled in my husband's career choices and demanded more respect because he was the breadwinner. That's why my husband didn't like being around his parents and moved out when he went to college. The only thing he's grateful to his parents for is that the profit from the ramen shop funded his college education. Thanks to that, he got a job in a reputable company and wants to repay them for their kindness someday. But other than that, he generally wants to avoid them. Since he told me that I hadn't met with my in-laws even once after getting married, I think one reason we haven't had to meet them is that we don't have children yet. For a while, we lived happily as a married couple. However, recently my in-laws' ramen shop started facing financial difficulties. Their rude attitude was the main cause. In the past, if a ramen shop had good food, people would visit even if the owner was gruff and unapproachable. But now, online reviews and social media heavily influence a shop's reputation. The in-laws service became the subject of many negative reviews. Complaints ranged from the owner being too curt to messy serving by the waitresses, to the owner visibly getting grumpier during rush hours. It felt like they had become complacent due to their initial success. However, in reality, their business dwindled, and the branches served food worse than instant ramen. Negative reviews spread rapidly, causing their shop's reputation to plummet. They blamed the times and stubbornly stuck to their old ways, which eventually led to the closure of all their shops, including the main one. It seems they finally realized the gravity of the situation. Uncharacteristically, they turned to their son, my husband, for help. "Tom, please help us. At this rate, we'll end up on the streets," they pleaded. My husband had anticipated his parents would come to us like this. It really didn't work out, did it? I told you before, didn't I? If you act too arrogantly, you'll end up regretting it. There's a saying that the customer is God. If you treat them carelessly, they'll come back to bite you. Back then, you dismissed my words as just naive opinions, didn't you? This is your own doing. You really should reflect on your actions. I'm sorry. Would you like any further adjustments? But turning to us for help is futile. My husband stated firmly. My in-laws collapsed to their knees, crying at his harsh words. I never imagined my kind-hearted husband could be so stern. Yet I could feel the love he held for his parents in his words. He spoke sternly out of concern for them. At that moment, I realized how admirable my husband's character was and fell for him all over again. Eventually, my in-laws gave up and left. However, a month later, they returned to us looking completely worn out without a single branded item they used to flaunt. Even after selling all our branded goods, we still can't pay off our debt. We even sold the car, but there's still so much debt remaining. Can you help us out, please, Tom? We don't have anyone else to turn to, they pleaded, bowing deeply to their son. My husband crossed his arms, pondering what to do. I wasn't fond of my in-laws, but seeing them in such dire straits made me want to help them. Tom, what about sending them a monthly allowance? I suggested. My husband looked surprised, and the in-laws also looked shocked, lifting their heads to gaze at us. Emily, are you sure? My husband asked. Yes, I replied. You mentioned wanting to repay them for putting you through college, didn't you, Tom? Is that true? Well, I didn't say something like that. My husband hesitated. Tom, please, we'll work hard to pay off our debts. Can you at least support our living expenses? The in-laws pleaded again, bowing deeply. In the end, my husband agreed to support his parents. He decided to transfer $700 to them every month. Would you like any adjustments to this version? I chose to send $800 every month. My husband told me I didn't need to send that much, but I wanted my in-laws to pay off their debts and restart their lives as soon as possible. I believe this incident would make them reconsider their arrogant attitude. Besides, I had a source of income other than my regular job, income from real estate. I had been studying stocks and investments for a long time and had managed to grow my assets through it. After accumulating a decent amount of wealth, I purchased a luxury apartment and used it for rental income. Little by little, my assets grew, and I bought another apartment for real estate investment. Before I knew it, I was earning around $700,000 annually, so I had a lot of financial leeway. Of course, I kept this a secret from my in-laws. I was giving my husband a bit more money than necessary to support his parents for his sake. The in-laws were very grateful for our support and expressed their thanks. Tom, thank you so much. Thanks to you, our life is slowly becoming stable, they said. Seeing them express their gratitude made Tom visibly happy. I hoped that with this, they would find jobs and be able to repay their debts. However, a month went by, and it seemed they still hadn't found any work. An even more troubling issue arose. The in-laws started visiting our house frequently during weekdays. Our food expenses are getting a bit much, Emily. Could you possibly give us something to eat? They would say. They started coming around lunchtime and asking me for food. Initially, they'd just eat and leave, but recently they'd been lounging on the sofa after meals and even asking for desserts. Is this version alright, or would you like further adjustments? I have work too, so I'd appreciate it if you didn't stay too long, I told the in-laws as my work was beginning to be affected. The in-laws exchanged glances and laughed. Work? Aren't you always at home? If you're going to lie, at least make it more believable, they scoffed, chuckling. Perhaps because they've been in the food and beverage industry for a long time, they might not be familiar with the concept of remote work. I tried explaining it in detail to them, but they responded with, "We don't really understand all this computer stuff," and didn't try to comprehend my explanation. No matter how much I told them I was busy with work, they wouldn't listen, and their demands only increased. Emily, we're out of tea. Hurry up and go buy some. Don't you have any snacks? Prepare some rice crackers or something. Such a useless daughter-in-law. For a housewife, you're really inconsiderate, they criticized. The in-laws kept blaming me with such words. They promised to work and repay their debts, but they kept saying they couldn't find jobs and continued to intrude into our home during the day. Moreover, they hurriedly leave before my husband returned. Probably they felt a bit guilty towards him, who was providing them financial support, or maybe they just didn't want to be asked if they found a job yet. Is this version okay, or would you like any further adjustments? I was at my limit, even though I contribute a significant part of the money we give them. Why do I have to be treated this way? I stood up to the in-laws and said firmly, "Please leave now." The in-laws, seemingly never expecting me to say that, were taken aback for a moment, but immediately their faces turned bright red with anger. "Who do you think you are? A mere wife giving orders to your husband's parents?" they retorted. "Exactly, and you're just a housewife depending on Tom's income. How many times do I have to tell you I'm not just a housewife? Enough of your delusional stories. That's how the in-laws kept shouting. Then, with a gleam in their eyes, they came up with an idea. Right, you should just leave this place. What? I exclaimed. Indeed, that's the best idea. It's because of you that Tom's remittance to us is so small. You know we're sending you $1,500 a month, right? What do you mean it's not enough? I asked incredulously. Well, that's just what our living expenses amount to normally. It's actually barely enough, they insisted. I was at a loss for words. They seemed to be the type who, no matter how much money they received, couldn't give up their luxurious lifestyle. As I stood there in disbelief, they glared at me coldly. Hey, how long are you planning to stand there daydreaming? Pack your bags already, huh? Don't you understand what we're telling you? You really are dense, aren't you? We're telling you to stop leeching off our son for money. Get lost, you parasite of a wife. They sneered. With those words, the in-laws tried to throw me out. I realized there was no point in talking to them anymore, so I decided to leave as they demanded. Understood. I'll pack my things and leave, I said calmly. My in-laws looked smug. Now our lives are finally secure, they chuckled. If it was just the three of us, Tom and us, everything would have gone smoothly from the start, I thought to myself, ignoring their hurtful remarks. Is this version okay, or would you like any further adjustments? I began to pack my things. I'll disappear as quickly as possible, I thought. Hearing this, my in-laws left with a look of satisfaction. That night, I explained the situation to my husband. When he returned home, he was more dumbfounded than angry. Emily, I'm truly sorry, he said. It's okay. Now I realize that they'll never change. It's good to know that there's no point in trying anymore. I comforted my husband. Together, we packed our things and decided to leave the house. About 2 weeks later, we received a call from the in-laws. So, what's the situation now? Have you left the house? I've been trying to contact Tom about the remittances, but he seems too busy to answer the phone. We've already left, so you can rest easy. You won't see me in front of you anymore, I replied. Hearing this, I could hear my in-laws rejoicing on the other end. Ah, I see, haha. Finally, our son can get rid of the burden that was you. Haha, now with this, Tom's remittances will increase and our life will get easier, they chuckled. The in-laws seemed pleased as they continued their conversation. I sighed and responded sharply, You really had a lot to say about me, didn't you? It would be good for you to experience firsthand who truly fits the description of a parasite. As I said this, I could hear the in-laws getting angry again. With that attitude, you truly are a hopeless daughter-in-law. Well, you're probably not even our daughter-in-law anymore. You might as well live a poor and lonely life, they snapped. My in-laws were so deluded, I figured I'd just let them keep believing that. So I made some non-committal responses and hung up the phone. Is this version alright, or would you like any further adjustments? I received another call. Do you need something else? As soon as I answered, my in-laws, sounding panicked, started interrogating me. What the hell is going on? When I went to the apartment where Tom lives, someone else was living there. You know something, don't you? Even if you two broke up, tell me where Tom is, they demanded information. My husband, who was listening next to me, took the phone. I've always been with Emily, Tom. Why are you with that woman, and why have the remittances to us stopped? Maybe because you insulted and tried to drive away my precious wife. I won't forgive anyone who hurts my beloved wife, even if it's my own parents. Besides, you never listened when Emily explained multiple times about her job and such. Did you? You probably didn't even try to find out that Emily was sending you more money than I was. Is that true, Emily? Were you sending them $1,500 every month because you wanted them to pay off their debts quickly? And yet, they insulted you, calling you useless. I won't be sending anything to such parents, sorry, but I'm cutting ties with you as family. Now, deal with your debts on your own, my husband declared firmly. Wait, I had no idea Emily was earning so much. Can you forgive us if we apologize? Maybe then you can send money again, pleaded my in-laws. It's too late, just give it up, my husband replied, hanging up the phone. I then blocked my in-laws' number, ensuring that we would no longer be involved with them. According to what my husband heard from relatives, our in-laws sold their house but couldn't pay off their debts. Now, they apparently live in a rundown apartment, both working low-wage jobs to make ends meet and pay off their debts. When they were successful with their ramen restaurant, they reportedly acted arrogantly towards their relatives. When they ran out of money, they seemed to have asked their relatives for help, but nobody assisted them. So, they are now completely isolated, living in absolute poverty. My husband and I have given them as much support as we could. We can't cover for them anymore. It's their own doing. I doubt they'll ever change their ways or attitude, so they might as well continue living this way. On the other hand, we continue to enjoy our time together as a working couple. A year later, I became pregnant. I hadn't expected to have a child at this time, but we are grateful for this blessing from above. Together with my beloved husband, we plan to raise our precious child. Does this version meet your expectations, or would you like any further adjustments?
The mahogany-paneled conference room at Mitchell, Stone and Associates smelled of old money and older grudges. I sat in the furthest chair from the head of the table, watching my cousins arrange themselves like they were posing for a family portrait that would hang in some country club. Derek, 35 and still living off his trust fund, had claimed the seat closest to Mr. Mitchell, our grandmother's lawyer. Beside him sat his sister Vanessa, whose idea of work was managing her Instagram account and planning charity galas she never actually organized. My Aunt Patricia, Derek and Vanessa's mother, perched at Derek's right side like a hawk eyeing prey. She'd been circling Grandma Rose's fortune for years, dropping hints about responsible family members and bloodline obligations. Across from them, my other cousins, Bradley and his twin sister Madison, whispered conspiratorially, occasionally glancing my way with barely concealed disdain. I'm Sophia Martinez, the family disappointment. At 28, I'm the granddaughter who chose social work over business school, who drives a 10-year-old Honda instead of leasing luxury cars, who lives in a modest apartment instead of the family compound. The one who spent every summer with Grandma Rose while the others were at expensive camps or European vacations they posted about endlessly. Well, Derek said, straightening his designer tie as I took my seat. Look who decided to show up after all. Vanessa didn't even look up from her phone. I'm surprised you could get time off from, what is it you do again? Work with homeless people. Community development, I replied quietly, though I knew the distinction was lost on them. They'd never bothered to learn what my job actually entailed, how I'd spent years building programs that transformed entire neighborhoods, how my nonprofit had become a model for urban renewal initiatives across the country. Right, Bradley chimed in, his voice dripping with condescension. Very noble. I'm sure Grandma Rose appreciated your charitable spirit. Mr. Mitchell, a distinguished man in his 70s who'd handled the Whitmore family legal affairs for decades, cleared his throat and arranged his papers. The Whitmore name carried weight in this city, old shipping money that had evolved into real estate investments and influence. Grandma Rose had been the family matriarch, the one who held everything together after Grandpa died. Thank you all for coming, Mr. Mitchell began, his voice carrying the gravity of the moment. As you know, we're here for the reading of Rose Elizabeth Whitmore's last will and testament. Aunt Patricia leaned forward eagerly. Yes, well, we all know Rose was very practical about family obligations. I'm sure she's made sensible arrangements. Derek nodded smugly. Grandma always liked us better, he said, shooting me a look. Don't get your hopes up, Sophia. This is about family legacy, not whatever it is you've been doing. I said nothing, remembering instead the quiet afternoons I'd spent with Grandma Rose in her garden, listening to her stories about building the family business. How she taught me to invest my small savings, how she'd quietly funded my college education when my parents couldn't afford it, how she'd been the only one who believed in my work. The estate, Mr. Mitchell continued, includes properties, investments, business holdings and liquid assets totaling approximately $50 million. The room fell silent. Even with the family's wealth, $50 million was substantial. Vanessa finally looked up from her phone. Bradley and Madison exchanged glances. Derek's smirk grew wider. Now, Mr. Mitchell said, adjusting his glasses, Mrs. Whitmore was very specific about her wishes. She spent considerable time ensuring her will reflected not just her family relationships, but her values and observations about each of you. Aunt Patricia sat up straighter. Of course, Rose always valued family tradition and responsibility. Indeed she did, Mr. Mitchell agreed, but something in his tone made me look up. Which brings me to the primary bequest. The entire estate, properties, business holdings, investments, trust funds, everything, goes to... The room held its breath. Derek's hand was already reaching for his phone, probably to call his financial advisor. Vanessa had that satisfied smile she wore when she got exactly what she expected. Goes to Sofia Elena Martinez. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek's phone clattered to the table. Vanessa's mouth fell open, her perfect lipstick making a small "oh" of shock. Bradley's face went through several colors before settling on purple. Madison looked like she might faint. Aunt Patricia stood up so quickly her chair nearly toppled backward. "That's impossible," she sputtered. "Rose would never, she's not even a Whitmore. She's my granddaughter," Mr. Mitchell said calmly, reading from the will. "And according to Mrs. Whitmore's written statement, the only one who understood what family truly means." Derek found his voice first, though it came out as a croak. "This is a mistake. Grandma she was probably confused, not thinking clearly. Mrs. Whitmore was in perfect health and sound mind when she updated this will 6 months ago," Mr. Mitchell replied. "She also left individual letters for each of you." He began distributing sealed envelopes. Mine was thick cream-colored paper with my name written in Grandma Rose's careful script. The others received thinner envelopes. I could hear Vanessa tearing hers open immediately. "This can't be right," she said, reading frantically. She says I never visited unless I needed money." Bradley was reading his letter, his face growing paler. "She knew about the gambling debts." Madison's hands trembled as she read. "The rehab. She knew about the prescription pills." Derek's letter remained unopened in his shaking hands. Aunt Patricia had sat back down heavily, staring at her envelope like it might contain a bomb. I opened mine slowly. Grandma Rose's voice seemed to speak from the pages. "My dearest Sophia. If you're reading this, then my family has finally learned what I've known for years. That true worth isn't measured in bank accounts or social connections, but in character and compassion. While your cousins were learning to spend money, you were learning to help people. While they were networking at country clubs, you were building community centers. While they saw our family name as an entitlement, you saw it as a responsibility. The others will be shocked, but you won't be. You've always known this day would come. Not because I promised you anything, but because you were the only one who never asked for anything. Asterisk." My eyes filled with tears as I continued reading. Asterisk, "The nonprofit you think is struggling? I've been your anonymous donor for 5 years. The community center you're trying to save? I bought the building and put it in trust for your organization. The scholarship fund you started with your own savings? I've been matching every donation 10 to 1. You thought you were working with limited resources, but you were actually managing a multi-million-dollar operation. And you did it brilliantly." Asterisk. The room around me had erupted into chaos. Derek was on his feet, pacing and shouting about contesting the will. Vanessa was crying, her mascara creating dark streams down her cheeks. Aunt Patricia was demanding to speak to Mr. Mitchell privately. But I was still reading, discovering that every project I'd struggled to fund, every program I thought I was building from scratch, had been quietly supported by the woman who believed in me when no one else did. "There's more, sweetheart. The family business. It's not just real estate anymore. Over the past decade, I've been converting our holdings into exactly the kind of sustainable development you've been advocating for. Affordable housing, community centers, green spaces. You didn't know it, but you've been consulting on these projects through your nonprofits partnerships. You've been helping me reshape the family legacy into something worthy of the Whitmore name." Mr. Mitchell was trying to restore order, but Derek was having none of it. "This is fraud," he shouted. "She manipulated a sick old woman." "Careful, Derek," Mr. Mitchell warned. Mrs. Whitmore also included provisions for potential challenges to the will. That stopped him. What kind of provisions? Should anyone contest this will, their individual trust funds, yes, you all have modest trust funds, will be immediately donated to charity. Mrs. Whitmore specifically named Sophia's Community Development Foundation as the beneficiary. Vanessa stopped crying. "She wouldn't dare." "She absolutely would," I said quietly, still absorbing everything I'd learned. "She always believed actions have consequences." I looked up at my family. My cousins who'd never seen me as anything more than an obligation, my aunt who'd spent years undermining me at every family gathering. She also believed in second chances. Second chances? Bradley scoffed. "For what?" I folded the letter carefully and stood up. Grandma Rose didn't just leave me money. She left me a responsibility. To you, to this family, to this community. I walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd spent years working in neighborhoods my cousins had never even driven through. The community center you called my little hobby, Vanessa? It serves 3,000 families. The housing project you said was beneath the family name, Derek? It's become a model for sustainable urban development across the country. Derek was reading his letter now, his face going ashen. I continued. The rehabilitation center Bradley's been attending? Grandma funded that too. The medical bills for Madison's treatment? All covered. The credit card debts Vanessa thought no one knew about? Paid in full. One by one they realized what I was saying. Grandma Rose hadn't just been watching me build something meaningful. She'd been watching all of them self-destruct, and she'd been quietly cleaning up their messes. She knew everything, Madison whispered. Every mistake, every lie, every time we asked our parents for money instead of asking her directly. And she helped anyway, I said. Because that's what family does. Not the performance of family you all put on at Christmas dinner, but real family. The kind that shows up. Aunt Patricia finally spoke, her voice small. What happens now? I thought about the projects I could expand, the communities I could serve, the legacy I could build on the foundation Grandma Rose had secretly provided. But I also thought about the scared, lost people sitting around this table. People who'd been given everything except the tools to become who they could be. How we work, I said. The family business is becoming a community development enterprise. There are jobs for all of you if you want them. Real jobs with real responsibilities. Derek looked suspicious. What kind of jobs? Vanessa, you're good at organizing events. We need someone to coordinate community outreach programs. Bradley, you understand numbers when you're not gambling with them. We need a financial manager for our housing initiatives. Madison, you're studying psychology. We could use someone to develop mental health support programs. I looked at each of them carefully. Derek, you have a business degree you've never actually used. We need someone to manage our partnerships with local organizations. And if we say no? Aunt Patricia asked. Then you say no, I replied. The trust funds will support you comfortably. You can continue your lives exactly as they are. But the family legacy, the Whitmore name, goes in a different direction. Mr. Mitchell cleared his throat. There's one more thing. Mrs. Whitmore left a final video message, specifically for this moment. He pressed a button on his laptop and suddenly Grandma Rose was there on the conference room screen, sitting in her favorite garden chair, looking directly at us. Hello, my dear family, her recorded voice said. If you're watching this, then you've just learned what I've been planning for years. She looked directly into the camera, her eyes twinkling with the mischief I remembered from our afternoon conversations. Sophia, sweetheart, you've been managing my most important investments without even knowing it. Every program you've built, every community you've served, every life you've changed, that's been my greatest return on investment. She turned her attention to the others. Derek, Vanessa, Bradley, Madison, I love you all. But love means more than providing for you. It means helping you become who you're capable of being. Sophia has been showing you how to do that for years. Now it's time to pay attention. The video continued, but I was watching my cousins' faces. The shock was fading, replaced by something I'd never seen before. Recognition. Maybe even respect. The Whitmore family has always been about building things, Grandma Rose concluded. Now I want you to build something that matters. Together. The screen went dark. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Finally, Vanessa spoke. The community outreach position. What would that actually involve? Planning events that bring resources to people who need them, I explained. Health fairs, job training workshops, educational programs. You'd be coordinating with local organizations, managing volunteers, creating real impact. She nodded slowly. I think I'd like to try that. Bradley raised his hand tentatively. The financial management position. Would there be oversight? I mean, given my history? Strict oversight, I confirmed. Monthly reviews, co-signature requirements, full transparency. But also training, mentorship, a chance to use your skills for something meaningful. One by one they began asking questions. Real questions about work, about responsibility, about being part of something larger than themselves. Derek was the last holdout. This is all very noble, Sophia, but let's be honest. You just inherited $50 million and you're offering us jobs. Some might call that patronizing. I smiled, thinking of all the afternoons Grandma Rose and I had discussed this exact scenario. Derek, the $50 million isn't a gift. It's a down payment. The real wealth is in what we can build together. I pulled out my laptop and opened a presentation I'd been working on for years, never knowing I had the resources to implement it. This is the Whitmore Community Initiative, I said, clicking through slides showing proposed developments, program structures, partnership networks. Affordable housing that's actually beautiful. Community centers that serve entire families. Job training programs that lead to real careers. Educational initiatives that break cycles of poverty. The slides showed detailed plans, architectural renderings, budget projections. Years of work I'd done in my spare time, dreaming of what could be possible with adequate funding. Grandma Rose didn't just leave me money, I continued. She left me the means to prove that business success and social impact aren't contradictory. That family wealth can be a force for actual good. Madison leaned forward, studying the mental health program slides. These support groups, they're based on the model that helped me. Grandma Rose suggested I research that approach, I admitted. She never said why, but now I understand. Aunt Patricia, who had remained silent through most of the discussion, finally spoke. Rose was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. I should have known she'd find a way to save us all from ourselves. She looked at me with something approaching admiration. You've been planning this for years, haven't you? The real question is whether we're wise enough to follow your lead. Mr. Mitchell gathered his papers. The estate transition will take approximately 30 days to complete. During that time, you'll all have the opportunity to consider Mrs. Whitmore's final wishes and Ms. Martinez's proposals. As everyone prepared to leave, Derek approached me. For what it's worth, Sophia, I think Grandma Rose chose well. I hope you're prepared for what this means. Managing family money is complicated enough. Managing family expectations is nearly impossible. I know, I replied. But Grandma Rose didn't raise me to take the easy path. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of the Whitmore Community Center, watching Vanessa coordinate a job fair that would connect 200 local residents with employment opportunities. Through the windows, I could see Bradley walking potential investors through our affordable housing development, his enthusiasm genuine and infectious. Madison had thrown herself into developing our mental health programs with the passion of someone who understood both the need and the solution. Even Derek had surprised everyone by becoming genuinely invested in our partnership networks, using his networking skills for something more meaningful than country club politics. The community center itself was everything I'd dreamed of. Bright, welcoming spaces where families could access everything from childcare to legal assistance to job training. The Whitmore name was prominently displayed, but now it represented something worthy of the honor. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Board meeting went great. The city council approved our next 3 development sites. Grandma would be proud. As I walked through the center, greeting staff and community members, I thought about the letter Grandma Rose had left me. How she'd known that the real inheritance wasn't the money. It was the chance to transform what the Whitmore name meant in this city. The family still gathered for Sunday dinners, but the conversations had changed. Instead of gossip and complaints, we talked about projects and programs, about families we'd helped house and communities we'd helped strengthen. Aunt Patricia had even started volunteering in our literacy program, discovering a patience and kindness she'd forgotten she possessed. That evening, sitting in Grandma Rose's garden, now part of the community center's grounds, I opened the last page of her letter, the part I'd saved for when the work was truly underway. The money will run out eventually, sweetheart. Money always does. But what you're building, the relationships, the trust, the proof that business can be a force for good, that's permanent. That's a legacy worth the Whitmore name. I couldn't be prouder of the woman you've become, or more excited about the world you're going to create. All my love and faith, Grandma Rose. P.S. Check the greenhouse. There's one more surprise waiting. I walked to the small greenhouse at the edge of the garden, now used for the community center's urban farming program. Behind a shelf of tomato seedlings, I found a small safe with a note taped to it, for when you're ready to think even bigger. Inside was a business plan in Grandma Rose's handwriting, detailed proposals for expanding the Whitmore Community Initiative to 10 cities, complete with funding strategies and partnership agreements she'd already negotiated. Also in the safe was a photo of the two of us from my college graduation, both of us grinning in the garden. On the back she'd written, "The day I knew for certain you were ready to change the world." I smiled, tucking the photo into my jacket pocket. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, board meetings and budget reviews and the endless complexity of turning vision into reality. But tonight, surrounded by the sound of families enjoying the community space we'd built together, I felt the deep satisfaction of work that mattered. The Whitmore name would continue for generations, but now it would mean something worthy of Grandma Rose's faith. Not just old money and older prejudices, but active compassion and the courage to build something better. As I locked up the greenhouse and headed home to my apartment, still modest, still practical, but now by choice rather than necessity, I thought about the phone call I'd received that afternoon. Another city council, asking if the Whitmore Community Initiative model could work in their city. Change, it seemed, was spreading. One community, one family, one conversation at a time. Just as Grandma Rose had planned all along. The crystal glasses clinked as my father raised his fourth whiskey of the evening. "To success," he announced to our gathered family, "and to those who understand what it takes to achieve it." His eyes found mine across the dining table, heavy with disapproval. I sipped my water quietly, letting his implied criticism wash over me. In their eyes I was Oliver Bennett, the family disappointment, the black sheep who couldn't hold down a proper job. If they only knew I'd spent the morning in a secure conference room with the Bank of England's governors, finalizing the economic recovery plan that would save our nation from the brink of financial collapse. "Still between jobs, Oliver?" Uncle Richard called out, not bothering to hide his smirk. "What's it been now, 6 months?" 8. My sister Margaret corrected, adjusting her Cartier watch, a gift from her investment banker husband. "Though I'm not sure we can count those odd consulting jobs he claims to have." I smiled politely, cutting into my beef Wellington. The odd consulting jobs, they mocked, had actually prevented 3 major banks from collapse and restructured our country's entire foreign debt strategy. But they didn't need to know that. "Not yet. I'm managing," I said simply. My father scoffed. "Managing to waste that Oxford education, you mean? Your brother James runs our family's investment firm. Margaret's husband is a partner at Goldman Sachs. And you drift between temporary positions like a lost ship." The irony was almost painful. While they saw a directionless 35-year-old who couldn't commit to a career, the Prime Minister had my private number on speed dial. My economic models had become the foundation for the country's post-crisis recovery strategy. But my security clearance meant maintaining absolute secrecy, even from family. "Speaking of success," my mother chimed in, "did you all see the news about the mysterious economic advisor who's been revolutionizing our fiscal policy? They say he's single-handedly prevented a recession." I took another sip of water, remembering the headlines she was referencing. The press had dubbed me the shadow economist, the unnamed architect behind the country's most ambitious financial reforms in decades. "Probably some senior civil servant with actual credentials," James said, shooting me a pointed look. "Someone who understands commitment and hard work." My phone buzzed quietly in my pocket. A text from Sarah, my direct line to the Prime Minister's office. "Emergency meeting. 10 p.m. The situation in Brussels needs your immediate attention." "Excuse me," I said, standing from the table. "I need to take care of something." "Of course you do," my father muttered. Always running away from responsibility. If he only knew I was running toward preventing an international financial crisis. In my car, I quickly changed from my deliberately casual dinner clothes into a tailored suit I kept ready for emergency meetings. Within 20 minutes I was being ushered through the back entrance of 10 Downing Street, where the Prime Minister and his core team awaited. "Oliver," the PM greeted me, his face grave. "The EU Central Bank is wavering on our proposed stability measures. We need your magic." For the next 4 hours, I reworked financial models and negotiated with Brussels via secure video link. By 2 a.m., we'd prevented a potential economic catastrophe that would have decimated the European markets. "Brilliant work as always," the PM said as we wrapped up. "I don't know what this country would do without you." I thought of my family's dinner table, of their dismissive looks and cutting remarks. "Just doing my job, sir." The next morning I arrived at my modest flat, the one my family believed I could barely afford, just as my sister Margaret was calling. "Mom and Dad are worried sick," she started without preamble. "You disappeared from dinner without explanation. Do you ever think about anyone but yourself?" I glanced at the morning papers spread across my desk, each featuring headlines about the averted financial crisis. Crisis that no one knew I'd helped prevent. "Sorry," I said. "Something came up." She sighed dramatically. "Something always comes up with you, Oliver. The family's annual charity gala is next week. Try to at least pretend to be responsible for one evening." The charity gala. The event where London's elite gathered to network and show off their success. My family had been hosting it for generations, each year using it as another opportunity to highlight the contrast between their achievements and my apparent failures. What they didn't know was that this year would be different. The Prime Minister had insisted on attending personally, not for them but for me. After years of working in the shadows, he'd decided it was time for the shadow economist to step into the light. "I'll be there," I promised Margaret. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." After she hung up, I turned to my secure laptop, reviewing the latest economic projections. The recovery plan I'd designed was working better than anyone had anticipated. The pound was strengthening, employment rates were climbing, and foreign investment was flooding back into the country. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from the Bank of England's governor. "The numbers are extraordinary. The PM is right. It's time people knew who's really been saving this economy." I walked to my window watching the city wake up. The same city I'd helped pull back from the edge of economic disaster. For years I'd let my family believe I was lost, unfocused, unsuccessful. I'd endured their judgment, their disappointment, their constant comparisons. But in 1 week at their precious charity gala, everything would change. The Prime Minister himself would reveal that the mysterious economic advisor, the financial genius they'd been reading about in the papers, was none other than their disappointing son. My father's words echoed in my head, "The black sheep who can't hold a job." I smiled, thinking of the speech the PM had prepared for the gala. Sometimes being the black sheep just means you're playing a different game entirely. The week before the gala crawled by with excruciating slowness. Every family dinner, every condescending phone call, every well-meaning suggestion about entry-level positions felt like another weight added to a spring being compressed, just waiting to release. I was in my real office, a secure floor in Whitehall that officially didn't exist, when James called. "Father insists you wear something presentable to the gala," he said without greeting. "He's arranged for you to borrow one of my old suits. Can't have you showing up in whatever bargain bin outfit you're wearing these days." I glanced down at my bespoke Tom Ford suit, worth more than James's monthly salary. "That's thoughtful of him. And try not to mention your consulting work to any of the guests. These are serious people, Oliver. Board members, CEOs, actual economic advisors." Through my office window, I could see the Bank of England building where, just hours ago, I'd presented my latest financial strategy to its governing board. I'll keep that in mind. Good. Oh, and apparently the Prime Minister might make an appearance. Try to make yourself scarce during that part. Last thing we need is you embarrassing the family in front of the PM. I ended the call, turning back to the multiple screens displaying real-time global market data. Sarah, my liaison with the PM's office, walked in with fresh intelligence reports. "Your family still doesn't suspect anything?" she asked, having witnessed countless similar calls over the years. "They see what they expect to see," I replied, reviewing the documents. "Though that's about to change rather dramatically." She smiled. "The PM's quite excited about the reveal. He's even moved some international calls around to ensure he can make a proper entrance." That afternoon I had another family obligation, tea with my mother and her social circle. I arrived deliberately 10 minutes late to her favorite private club, wearing a slightly rumpled shirt and scuffed shoes, the costume of unsuccessful offspring I'd perfected over years. "Oh, Oliver," my mother sighed as I sat down. "Couldn't you have at least ironed your shirt?" Her friends exchanged knowing looks. These were the wives of industry leaders and political figures, women who measured worth in titles and account balances. "Did you see the morning news?" Mrs. Blackwood asked the group. "They're saying this mysterious economic advisor has introduced some revolutionary new financial model. The markets are responding incredibly well. My husband says this advisor must be brilliant," Mrs. Henderson added. Apparently even the Americans are studying his methods now. I stirred my tea quietly, remembering the video conference I'd had with the U.S. Federal Reserve earlier that morning. Speaking of jobs, my mother cut in pointedly, Oliver's still looking for something suitable. Perhaps one of your husbands might have an opening? Something entry-level, of course. The women's expressions shifted to practiced sympathy. Of course, dear, Mrs. Blackwood said. Everyone goes through difficult periods. Just then my secure phone buzzed. A message from the PM's office. Brussels emergency. Need you at Downing Street immediately. Sorry, Mother, I said, standing. I have to go. Another one of your mysterious consulting meetings? She asked, disapproval heavy in her voice. Really, Oliver, when will you start taking life seriously? I was already halfway to Downing Street when my brother called again. You embarrassed Mother in front of her entire social circle, he snapped. Mrs. Henderson's husband is the finance minister, for God's sake. He could have helped you find a real job. I smiled, thinking of how often I'd overruled that same finance minister in policy meetings. I'm sure he could have. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation, both for the continuing economic management of the country and for the upcoming revelation at the gala. My family's messages grew increasingly demanding as the event approached. Margaret, don't forget to pick up James's suit. And please do something about your hair. Father, I've arranged for you to sit at the far table. Try not to draw attention to yourself. Mother, several important banking executives will be attending. Please, Oliver, don't mention your temporary jobs. The day before the gala, I was called to an emergency meeting with the PM and his senior advisors. A major international bank was showing signs of instability that could trigger a new financial crisis. We need options, Oliver, the PM said, looking exhausted. If this bank falls, it could start a domino effect across Europe. For the next 18 hours I worked non-stop, designing an intervention strategy that would stabilize the bank without causing market panic. By dawn we'd averted another crisis, but I hadn't slept. My phone was filled with missed calls from family members, all leaving increasingly agitated messages about gala preparations. Where are you? James demanded in his latest voicemail. You were supposed to collect the suit hours ago. Do you even care about this family's reputation? I looked at my reflection in the office window, still wearing yesterday's clothes, dark circles under my eyes from the all-night crisis management. In 12 hours, everything would change. In 12 hours they would finally understand where I'd really been all these years. Sarah appeared at my door. Car's ready to take you home. You should get some rest before tonight. I nodded, gathering my things. Any last-minute changes to the PM's schedule? No, he's cleared his entire evening. Says he wouldn't miss this for the world. She paused. Are you ready for this? Once it's done, everything changes. I thought about all the dinners I'd endured, all the cutting remarks, all the times they'd made me feel small for not fitting their definition of success. I've been ready for years, I replied. They just weren't ready for me. The annual Bennett Family Charity Gala was always an exercise in opulence, but this year they'd outdone themselves. The grand ballroom of the Dorchester gleamed with crystal chandeliers and elaborate flower arrangements, each table set with hand-painted china and sterling silver cutlery. I arrived exactly on time, deliberately ignoring James's borrowed suit in favor of a bespoke tuxedo that cost more than his car. The security team, my security team, though no one knew it, nodded imperceptibly as I passed. Oliver. Margaret's voice cut through the crowd. Where on earth have you been? And what are you wearing? That's not James's suit. I managed to find something appropriate, I said mildly, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. My father appeared, his face already flushed with whiskey and irritation. You were supposed to sit at table 11 in the back. We have the finance minister and 3 bank chairmen at the main table. The Prime Minister himself might attend. So I've heard. Just try not to draw attention to yourself, he muttered, already turning away. And for God's sake, don't mention your unemployment to anyone. I checked my phone. A message from Sarah. PM en route. ETA 15 minutes. Ready when you are. The ballroom filled quickly with London's elite, banking executives, political figures, industrial titans. I watched as my family worked the room, my father bragging about James's latest business acquisition, My mother showcasing Margaret's charity work. Did you hear? Mrs. Henderson whispered loudly to her group, not bothering to lower her voice as I passed. They say the shadow economist will be revealed tonight. Apparently he's been working directly with the PM all this time. Brilliant man by all accounts, her husband, the finance minister, added. Completely revolutionized our economic approach. Saved us from certain recession. I hid my smile behind my champagne glass, remembering how vigorously he'd opposed my strategies until the PM had forced him to accept them. At precisely 8:30, a ripple of excitement moved through the crowd. The Prime Minister had arrived. I watched my father practically trip over himself rushing to greet him, James and Margaret close behind. My mother beamed with pride as the PM shook their hands, clearly believing this moment was about their family's importance. Ladies and gentlemen, the PM's aide announced, the Prime Minister would like to say a few words. The room hushed. My family preened, positioned prominently near the stage. Thank you all for having me tonight, the PM began. As many of you know, our nation has faced unprecedented economic challenges in recent years. We've weathered potential recessions, international banking crises, and market instabilities that could have devastated our economy. My father nodded sagely as though he'd had anything to do with it. But thanks to one person, one brilliant economic mind, we've not only survived these challenges, we've emerged stronger. You've all heard of him in the press. The shadow economist, they call him. The mystery advisor who rebuilt our financial strategy from the ground up. The room was completely silent now, every eye fixed on the Prime Minister. Tonight I'm finally able to reveal his identity. To thank him properly for his service to our nation. The PM's eyes found mine across the room. Oliver, would you join me up here? The silence turned electric. My father's cigar dropped from his fingers. Margaret's champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the marble floor. James looked like he'd been struck. I walked to the stage, each step echoing in the stunned quiet. As I reached the PM, he pulled me into a warm embrace. Thank you, he whispered, loud enough for the microphone to catch, for saving our country's economy. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. My mother had to sit down, her legs seemingly unable to support her. For the past 5 years, the PM continued, Oliver Bennett has been our chief economic advisor, working at the highest levels of government. His financial models have been adopted by countries across Europe. His crisis management strategies are being taught at Harvard and Oxford. While working in complete secrecy for national security reasons, he has literally reshaped the future of our nation's economy. I stepped to the microphone, my voice calm and clear. Thank you, Prime Minister. Though I must admit, maintaining that secrecy was made easier by certain preconceptions about my career path. My father's face had turned an interesting shade of purple. James was frantically Googling on his phone, presumably finding all the news articles about the shadow economist that he'd previously ignored. Oliver, the finance minister called out, his previous condescension replaced with desperate recognition. All those meetings you missed, those unexplained absences, were spent in Whitehall, I finished for him, usually overruling your more conservative policies. The room tittered nervously. My mother had started fanning herself with a napkin. In fact, I continued, that emergency last night? The one that kept me from picking up the borrowed suit? That was me preventing a major international bank, one that some of you represent, from collapsing this morning. You're welcome, by the way. The PM smiled broadly. Thanks to Oliver's work, we're now entering our strongest economic period in decades. The banking reforms he designed have become a model for financial systems worldwide. The consulting jobs, Margaret whispered, loud enough to carry. The mysterious meetings were usually with heads of state, yes, I nodded. Though I did enjoy hearing everyone's helpful suggestions about entry-level positions. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of revelations. Every major financial figure in the room had been affected by my policies, had read my papers, published under a pseudonym, had implemented my strategies. Now they were all clamoring to speak with me, to claim some prior connection, to establish a relationship with the man they just discovered had been quietly shaping their entire industry. My family remained in various states of shock. My father attempted to approach several times, each time seemingly losing his nerve. James kept opening his mouth to speak, then closing it again. Margaret appeared to be having some sort of existential crisis in the corner. Finally, my mother made her way to me, tears in her eyes. Oliver, we had no idea. That was rather the point, Mother. But why? Why let us believe? I turned to face her fully. Because you all needed to believe you knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of. It made my work possible. And if I'm being honest, it made tonight infinitely more satisfying. As the evening wound down, the PM pulled me aside one last time. You could have told them years ago. I would have authorized it. I watched my family huddled together, still trying to process the evening's revelations. Some lessons are better learned dramatically, I replied. Besides, they never asked. They were so convinced they knew who I was, they never bothered to actually find out. Later that night, as I prepared to leave, my father finally found his voice. Son, we've been so wrong about you. I straightened my perfectly tailored tuxedo. No, Father, you've been exactly right about one thing. I couldn't hold a job. I smiled. I was too busy running the country's economy. The next morning's papers were splashed with headlines about the revelation. My phone was flooded with messages from family members, ranging from apologetic to sycophantic. But I was already back at work, focused on the actual business of managing a nation's financial future. Because that's the thing about being the black sheep. Sometimes you're not lost at all. Sometimes you're just operating on a completely different level, one that the rest of the flock can't even see until it's suddenly dramatically revealed. And sometimes, just sometimes, the black sheep turns out to be the one leading them all along. The scent of oil paint and turpentine filled my tiny studio apartment as I stared at the eviction notice taped to my door. 3 months behind on rent. The irony wasn't lost on me. This notice arrived the same day my piece sold for $2.8 million at a private auction in Geneva. Not that my mother would ever know that. Painting won't pay the bills, Alexandra. Her voice echoed in my head, the same words she'd been repeating since I was 16. Look at you, 30 years old, living in a cramped studio, barely making ends meet. Is this what you want from life? If she only knew that the cramped studio was just a cover, that the struggling artist her socialite friends pitted was now the anonymous force revolutionizing the modern art market. But I let them believe what they wanted. Sometimes invisibility is the greatest advantage you can have. I pulled the notice off the door and added it to my collection, 3 years' worth of carefully cultivated evidence of my supposed failure. Every bounced check, every late notice, every disappointment carefully archived to maintain the illusion that my mother had been right all along. My phone buzzed. Marcus, my attorney. The Rothschild acquisition is complete, he said without preamble. You now own controlling interest in the largest private art collection in Europe. The paperwork will be finalized tomorrow. I smiled, glancing at the past due notices scattered across my desk. Any word from the gallery? Construction is ahead of schedule. The Laurent Gallery will be ready for its grand opening in 3 weeks. Your mother's still on the board of the Arts Council, correct? Yes, I replied, remembering her latest lecture about how I was wasting my talent on experimental nonsense, while her friends' children were becoming doctors and lawyers. She hasn't missed a major gallery opening in 20 years. Perfect, Marcus said. The invitations go out tomorrow. Every major collector, critic, and socialite in the city will be there, including the entire Arts Council. I hung up and walked to my window, looking out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, my mother was probably at another charity luncheon, lamenting her daughter's poor life choices to her perfectly polished friends. The same friends who had no idea they'd been bidding against me at auctions for years. The real studio, my actual workspace, was in a converted warehouse on the other side of town. 40,000 square feet of state-of-the-art facilities where I created the pieces that sold for millions under various pseudonyms. But this cramped apartment, with its second-hand furniture and careful signs of struggle, this was my masterpiece. A perfect performance of the starving artist my family expected me to be. My sister Caroline called while I was mixing paints. Mom's beside herself, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. The Laurent Gallery opening is all anyone can talk about, and here you are still peddling your little paintings at coffee shops. Don't you want to make something of yourself? I dabbed blue paint onto canvas, phone pressed between ear and shoulder. Not everyone measures success the same way, Caroline. She sighed dramatically. The Arts Council is calling it the most significant cultural development in the city's history. The mysterious owner has apparently acquired some of the most valuable collections in the world. That could have been you if you'd listened to Mom and taken that gallery management course instead of insisting on following your passion. If she only knew that I own not just the Loron Gallery, but 6 others across 3 continents. That the mysterious owner she spoke of with such reverence was her little sister, the family disappointment. Maybe I'll stop by the opening, I said casually. See what all the fuss is about. Caroline laughed. In what? Those paint-splattered jeans you always wear? The guest list is more exclusive than the Met Gala. They're not letting in random street artists. I let her words wash over me, thinking about the invitation that would arrive at her house tomorrow. Gold embossed, personally signed by the gallery's curator, requesting the honor of her presence at the most anticipated cultural event of the decade. Later that evening, I drove to my real studio in my actual car, not the rusted Honda my family thought I still owned, but a sleek custom-made Mercedes. The security system recognized me immediately, steel doors sliding open to reveal my true world. Inside, massive canvases lined the walls, each worth more than my mother's house. In the center, my latest installation piece was taking shape, a commentary on perception and reality that would debut at the gallery opening. The irony made me smile. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Thomas, my head curator. The Times wants an interview with the owner, he said. They're running a feature on the gallery opening. What should I tell them? The usual, I replied. The owner prefers to remain anonymous, letting the art speak for itself. And what about the opening night? You know you'll have to be there. I walked to the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and purple. Oh, I'll be there. Just not as who they expect. The next morning, I met with my team to review the final preparations. The gallery was a masterpiece in itself, 9 stories of steel and glass, designed by the world's top architects. Every detail had been carefully considered, from the lighting to the acoustic engineering. Sarah, my PR director, spread out the guest list on the conference table. The Arts Council members are all confirmed, including your mother. She's bringing her usual circle. I nodded, scanning the names. All the people who had dismissed me, doubted me, pitted me over the years. They would all be there, dressed in their finest, eager to curry favor with the mysterious billionaire who had taken the art world by storm. The reveal needs to be perfect, I said. Not just for me, but for every artist who's ever been told their dreams weren't practical enough. Later that day, I visited my mother for our weekly dinner, a tradition she insisted on maintaining to keep me connected to reality. Her reality, of course. The maid let me in, trying not to stare at my deliberately casual clothes. In the dining room, my mother sat at the head of the table, perfectly coiffed as always. Alexandra, she said, disapproval evident in her tone. Couldn't you have dressed properly for dinner? I took my usual seat, the one furthest from her. Sorry, Mom. Been painting all day. She pressed her lips together. Yes, well. Speaking of which, have you given any more thought to that teaching position at the community center? It's not much, but at least it's steady income. Before I could answer, she continued. Oh, and did you hear about the Loron Gallery? Martha Williams' daughter is handling the catering. Now that's a sensible career in the arts. I hid my smile behind my water glass. Martha Williams' daughter had indeed gotten the catering contract from me, though she didn't know it. The opening's in 3 weeks, my mother continued. The whole city's talking about it. The owner is supposedly some European billionaire with impeccable taste. That's what happens when you approach art as a business, not just throwing paint at canvas and hoping something sticks. I thought about the contracts in my office safe, the acquisition papers for her favorite galleries in Paris and London, the international art funds I controlled through a network of holding companies. Maybe things will work out for me too, Mom, I said quietly. You never know. She patted my hand condescendingly. Of course, dear. Now about that teaching position. As I drove home that night, I thought about the upcoming opening. About the moment when everything would change. Not just for me, but for every parent who ever told their child that art wouldn't pay the bills. The invitations went out the next morning. I imagined my mother's face when she opened the heavy cream envelope, saw her name embossed in gold leaf. The same envelope was being delivered to every member of her precious Arts Council, every socialite who had ever whispered about poor Alexandra, still struggling with her art while her peers climbed corporate ladders. Little did they know I owned the ladders. The weeks leading up to the gallery opening felt like watching dominoes being meticulously arranged, each piece placed perfectly for the moment they would all fall. My mother's reaction to the invitation was exactly as I'd predicted. "Alexandra," she burst through my studio door without knocking, waving the cream envelope like a victory flag. "You'll never believe it. The Loron Gallery, we've all been invited. The entire Arts Council." I looked up from my canvas, carefully maintaining my practiced expression of mild interest. "That's nice, Mom." "Nice? It's extraordinary. Do you know how exclusive this opening is? The mysterious owner has apparently spent billions acquiring some of the most significant private collections in modern art. Everyone who's anyone will be there." I wiped paint from my hands with a cloth that had seen better days. "Sounds fancy." She surveyed my cramped studio with poorly concealed disappointment. "You know, if you'd stayed with traditional techniques instead of this experimental phase, you might have caught the attention of someone important. The Lawrence curator is known for discovering new talent." I bit back a smile, thinking of Thomas, my curator, who was at that moment hanging my latest piece in the gallery's central hall, under one of my pseudonyms, of course. "Actually," my mother continued, smoothing her Chanel suit, "I've been thinking, why don't you come to the opening? As my guest. It might be inspirational for you." I raised an eyebrow. "I thought it was exclusive." "Well, yes, but I'm sure they'll understand if I bring my daughter. Even if you're not." She gestured vaguely at my paint-splattered workspace, quite at their level. Yet. 2 days later, I stood in my real office 50 stories above the city, reviewing the final guest list with Sarah. The wall of windows offered a perfect view of the Loron Gallery, its glass facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Your mother's already called 3 times to confirm her +1, Sarah said, amusement dancing in her eyes. "She's quite insistent about having her struggling artist daughter attend." I smiled, remembering the conversation from my studio. "Let's make sure she gets what she wants." "And the seating arrangement?" I pointed to the floor plan spread across my desk. "Put her at table 1 right in front. I want her to have the perfect view when everything unfolds." My phone buzzed, Caroline calling again. I put it on speaker as I reviewed the opening night schedule. "Mom says you're coming to the Loron opening," she said without preamble. "Please tell me you're not wearing those awful paint-stained jeans." "I'll dress appropriately, Caroline." "You better. This isn't one of your coffee shop art shows. These are serious collectors, real players in the art world." I glanced at the latest acquisition report on my desk. $127 million for a private collection in Dubai, signed off that morning. "I understand the difference." "Do you?" She sighed. "Just try not to embarrass Mom. She's worked so hard to build her reputation on the Arts Council. The last thing she needs is her daughter showing up looking like a street artist." Sarah rolled her eyes as she gathered her papers. Everyone on my team knew the truth, had watched me build my empire from the ground up. They found my family's attitude alternately amusing and infuriating. That evening, I visited my secret vault beneath the gallery. Row upon row of the world's most valuable modern art pieces, each carefully authenticated and catalogued. This was where I kept my real collection, the one that would be revealed on opening night. Thomas joined me, clipboard in hand. "The main hall is ready. We've hung the piece you created last month as the centerpiece, the one about hidden truths and public perceptions." "Perfect timing," I murmured, running my fingers along the edge of a frame. "Your mother's going to have quite a shock." I turned to face him. "It's not about shocking her, Thomas. It's about showing her, showing all of them, that success doesn't always look the way they expect it to." The next week passed in a blur of final preparations. My mother called daily, alternating between excitement about the opening and concern about my appearance there. "I've heard the owner might actually attend," she gushed during one call. "Nobody knows who they are, isn't it thrilling? Martha thinks it might be some European aristocrat." I was actually in the gallery when she called, supervising the hanging of the last few pieces. "Maybe it's someone closer to home," I suggested. She laughed. "Oh, darling, no one in our circles has that kind of money or influence. This person has transformed the entire modern art market in just a few years." 3 days before the opening, I received another call, this time from my father. He'd left when I was 12, starting a new family and barely maintaining contact. Now he was suddenly interested in reconnecting. I heard about the Loron opening, he said, his voice overly casual. Your mother mentioned you'll be there. As her guest, yes. Well, I was thinking of attending myself. Important connections to be made at these events. Maybe we could. He cleared his throat. Maybe we could talk about your future. I know some people in the art world. I thought about the dossier on my desk. A complete analysis of his failing investment firm, the mounting debts he was trying to hide from his new family. I'll be pretty busy that night, I said. But thanks for thinking of me. The day before the opening, I visited my cramped studio one last time. This small space had served its purpose well, maintaining the illusion my family needed to believe. I'd already arranged for all my actual work to be moved to my real studio, leaving behind only the deliberately mediocre pieces they expected from me. As I was locking up, my mother appeared again carrying a garment bag. I brought you something to wear tomorrow night, she said, hanging the bag on my door. It's last season's Oscar de la Renta, but it should do. We can't have you showing up in your usual attire. I unzipped the bag, revealing a conservative black dress. Thanks, Mom, but I've already got something picked out. She pressed her lips together. Alexandra, please. This is important. The Loron Gallery opening isn't just another night. This is a chance to see how successful people operate in the art world. Maybe it will finally help you understand why I've pushed you so hard all these years. I looked at her, really looked at her, wondering if she'd ever understand that I had succeeded not despite ignoring her advice, but because of it. Trust me, Mom, I said softly. Tomorrow night will be educational for everyone. That evening, I went to my real penthouse. Not the studio apartment my family thought I lived in, but the two-story residence atop one of the city's most exclusive buildings. My dress for the opening hung in my closet, custom-made by a designer who knew exactly who I was. As I stood at my window watching the city lights flicker to life, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. About the years of hiding my success, of letting them believe I was struggling, of building something extraordinary in the shadows of their disappointment. Tomorrow everything would change. The Loron Gallery would open its doors, and the art world would finally meet its mysterious owner. My mother would finally understand that her daughter hadn't been wasting her life. She'd been revolutionizing an entire industry. But first I had one more role to play. The struggling artist, brought along as her mother's embarrassing +1. The dominoes were set. In less than 24 hours they would begin to fall. The day of the gallery opening dawned clear and crisp. I woke in my penthouse at 5 a.m., hours before my mother would expect her struggling artist daughter to surface. The wall of windows in my bedroom offered a perfect view of the Loron Gallery, its steel and glass facade already gleaming in the early morning light. My phone buzzed with messages from the team. Everything was in place. The catering staff had arrived, the security details were positioned, and the guest list had been finalized. In a few hours, the city's elite would gather to witness what they thought was just another gallery opening. They had no idea they were about to attend the most dramatic reveal in the art world's recent history. At precisely 10 a.m. my mother called. Alexandra, please tell me you're awake and preparing. This isn't one of your casual art shows where you can just throw on whatever and show up. I glanced at my reflection in the mirror, already perfectly groomed. I'm up, Mom. Good. I'll send a car to your apartment at 6. The opening starts at 7 and we absolutely cannot be late. The Times is covering this and the whole Arts Council will be there. I smiled, thinking of the newspaper's real headline already set for tomorrow morning. Art world shocked, reclusive Loron Gallery owner revealed as local prodigy. Don't worry, Mom. I wouldn't miss this for anything. At 5:45 p.m., I arrived at my studio apartment one last time, dressed in deliberately casual clothes. The Oscar de la Renta my mother had brought hung untouched on the door. Instead, hidden in a garment bag was my real outfit for the evening, a custom-made gown that cost more than this entire building. Right on schedule, my mother's car arrived. I got in, greeting her with the same slightly distant smile I'd perfected over years of these interactions. Oh, Alexandra, she sighed, eyeing my appearance. Please tell me that's not what you're wearing. I patted the garment bag beside me. I'll change at the gallery. She pressed her lips together but said nothing. The drive was filled with her nervous chatter about who would be there, which critics were attending, how much influence the mysterious owner wielded in the art world. We pulled up to the Laurent Gallery at 6:30 p.m. The building rose before us like a crystal palace, its 9 stories of artfully engineered glass and steel glowing from within. A red carpet led to the entrance where photographers were already gathering. "Remember," my mother whispered as we stepped out, "try to be discreet. These people are very important in the art world." She only knew that most of them worked for me. Inside, I excused myself to change, making my way to the private elevator that would take me to my office suite at the top of the building. Thomas was waiting. "Everything's ready," he said, handing me a tablet showing security feeds from throughout the gallery. "Your mother's been seated at table 1 as requested. Your sister just arrived with her husband and your father's trying to network with anyone who'll listen." I nodded, slipping out of my casual clothes and into the gown, a masterpiece of midnight blue silk and subtle crystalline details that had been crafted specifically for this moment. "The reveal is set for 8:30, Thomas continued. "After the initial reception and just before dinner. Your speech is loaded on the teleprompter, though I doubt you'll need it." I checked my reflection one final time. Gone was any trace of the struggling artist they thought they knew. In her place stood someone else entirely, the woman who had quietly transformed the modern art world. "Is the main hall ready?" Thomas smiled. "Your piece is in place. It's quite a statement." At 7:30 I watched from above as the gallery filled with guests. My mother held court at her table, clearly relishing her position of perceived importance. Caroline worked the room, dropping names and trying to connect with influential figures who, unknowingly, all reported to me. The initial presentations began at 8 o'clock, a series of carefully orchestrated speeches about the gallery's vision and impact on the art world. I could see my mother beaming as her friends whispered and pointed at various pieces, all while wondering about my conspicuous absence. Finally, at 8:25, Thomas took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this historic evening. As you know, the Laurent Gallery has transformed the modern art landscape under the guidance of a visionary collector and artist who until now has chosen to remain anonymous." The room hushed. I stepped into the private elevator that would take me to the main floor. Tonight that changes. Tonight we finally introduce you to the person who has not only created this space but has also become one of the most influential figures in contemporary art. I could see my mother leaning forward in her seat, probably already composing the social media posts she'd make about being present for this moment. The elevator doors opened silently behind the stage. "Please welcome," Thomas continued, "the owner and creative director of the Laurent Gallery, and the artist behind many of our most celebrated works." I stepped out into the spotlight. "Alexandra Laurent." The silence was absolute. Then came the gasps, the murmurs, the sound of glass shattering as my mother's champagne flute slipped from her hand. I walked to the microphone, my heels clicking against the marble floor. "Good evening, everyone. Welcome to my gallery." The look on my mother's face was indescribable, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning comprehension. Caroline had gone pale, her husband physically supporting her as she swayed in her seat. "Some of you know me," I continued, "or think you do. You know the version of me that worked in a small studio, that struggled to sell paintings in coffee shops. What you didn't know was that while you were pitying my choices, I was building this." I gestured to the space around us. "Every piece you've admired tonight, every collection you've discussed, every acquisition that made headlines, that was all me. The struggling artist you dismissed? She owns not just this gallery, but 6 others across 3 continents." My father had moved toward the exit, but security, my security, had already closed the doors. "I let you believe what you wanted to believe," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "I let you think I had failed because sometimes the greatest power comes from being underestimated." I turned to face the main hall where my latest installation hung, a massive piece titled Perceptions, made up of thousands of small mirrors arranged to create a larger image. From a distance, it showed a simple artist's studio. But up close, each mirror reflected a piece of my empire. "Tonight isn't just about revealing who I am," I continued. "It's about challenging what we think we know about success, about art, about power. And most importantly, it's about showing that sometimes the people you dismiss might just be the ones making history." The room erupted in applause, genuine from those who didn't know me, stunned and mechanical from my family. My mother sat frozen, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the daughter she thought she knew. As I stepped down from the stage, Thomas announced dinner would be served. The crowd began to move, but my mother remained seated, still staring. I walked to her table, stopping beside her chair. "Art won't pay the bills?" I said softly. "Mom, it bought the building." She reached for my hand, her fingers trembling. "Alexandra, I don't understand. All this time I was exactly who I always said I was, an artist. You just couldn't see it because it didn't fit your definition of success." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, interviews, and watching my family try to process their new reality. Caroline attempted to explain to anyone who would listen that she'd always supported my art. My father tried desperately to schedule a meeting about family investment opportunities. But my mother just sat there, staring at the empire her daughter had built while she wasn't looking. As the night wound down, I found myself back in my office suite, looking out over the city. Thomas joined me, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Quite a night," he said, handing me one. I nodded, thinking of all the moments that had led here, every dismissive comment, every pitying look, every time they tried to make me doubt my path. "You know what the best part is?" I said, watching the city lights twinkle below. "Tomorrow they'll all finally understand that success doesn't always look the way they expect it to. And maybe, just maybe, some other artist out there will hear this story and realize they don't need anyone's permission to build something extraordinary." The Loron Gallery still stands as a testament to that truth. And my mother? She finally got her wish. Her daughter's art is hanging in all the best galleries. After all, I own them. My name is Daniel Parker, and at 16, I learned that some people adopt children not out of love, but as an investment opportunity. Standing in the fluorescent-lit office of the Department of Children and Family Services, watching the woman I called Mom hand back my adoption papers like a defective purchase receipt, I had no idea that my entire childhood had been a carefully orchestrated financial scam. The story begins when I was 4 years old, though I wouldn't learn the truth until much later. My birth parents, Michael and Sarah Chin, were killed in a car accident caused by a drunk driver in Portland, Oregon. I survived the crash with minor injuries, but I lost everything. My parents, my home, my identity, and, as I would eventually discover, my financial security. The drunk driver who killed my parents was a wealthy tech executive named Robert Morrison. His blood alcohol level was nearly 3 times the legal limit when he ran a red light and slammed into my parents' car. The civil lawsuit that followed resulted in a $400,000 settlement for my parents' wrongful death, money that was supposed to secure my future and honor their memory. But I knew none of this when Linda and George Parker adopted me 6 months after the accident. To my 4-year-old mind, they were salvation from the confusing world of foster care and grief counseling. Linda was a warm, affectionate woman who baked cookies and read bedtime stories. George was a gentle man who taught me to ride a bike and help with homework. They lived in a modest but comfortable house in Beaverton, Oregon, with a backyard perfect for a young boy to explore. For 12 years, I believed I had been blessed with loving adoptive parents who had chosen me out of pure kindness. Linda worked as a medical receptionist, George was a postal worker, and together they provided what seemed like a stable, caring home. They attended my school events, celebrated my birthdays, and told me regularly that I was wanted and loved. What I didn't understand was that their motivation for adopting me had nothing to do with building a family and everything to do with accessing the $400,000 settlement that came with me. The truth about my adoption began to unravel during my sophomore year of high school. I had always been a good student, but as college applications approached, conversations about my future became increasingly strained. When I expressed interest in attending Oregon State University to study engineering, Linda and George's reactions were telling. "College is expensive," George said, avoiding eye contact. "Maybe you should consider community college first or trade school. Not everyone needs a 4-year degree." "But I have good grades," I protested. "And you always said education was important." Linda looked uncomfortable. "It is important, honey. But we need to be realistic about what we can afford." Their response confused me. While we weren't wealthy, they had always managed to provide for my needs. I had assumed they had been saving for my college education like other parents. Their sudden financial concerns about my future made me wonder if something had changed in our family's circumstances. The first concrete sign that something was wrong came when I overheard a heated argument between Linda and George in their bedroom one night. I was supposed to be asleep, but their raised voices carried through the thin walls of our house. "We can't keep putting this off," George was saying. "He's going to find out eventually." "Not if we're careful," Linda replied. "We just need to get him through high school and then he's on his own." "And what if he asks questions about college funding? What if he wants to see financial records?" "We'll figure something out. We always do." I pressed my ear closer to the wall, trying to understand what they were discussing. What would I find out? What financial records were they worried about? The conversation continued with fragments that made no sense to me at the time. "Should have planned better. The money's gone. Can't undo what we've done." I lay awake the rest of that night, wondering what secret my parents were keeping and why they seemed so worried about my future discoveries. Over the following weeks, I began paying closer attention to my parents' behavior and our family's financial situation. What I noticed was a pattern of expensive purchases that didn't align with their supposed concern about college costs. Linda drove a relatively new Honda Civic that she had purchased 2 years earlier. George had recently bought a Harley-Davidson motorcycle that he claimed was a midlife crisis purchase. They had remodeled the kitchen the previous year, installed a hot tub in the backyard, and taken annual vacations to Hawaii that seemed extravagant for a postal worker and medical receptionist. More puzzling was their attitude toward documentation of my early life. Whenever I asked questions about my adoption, my birth parents, or the circumstances that led me to their family, Linda and George became evasive and uncomfortable. "The past is the past," Linda would say. "What matters is that we're your family now." "Some things are better left alone," George would add. "Focus on the future, not what you can't change." Their reluctance to discuss my history struck me as odd. Most adoptive families I knew were open about the adoption process and encouraged questions about biological heritage. My parents' secrecy suggested they were hiding something significant. The breakthrough came during spring break of my sophomore year when I decided to research my own adoption records. Oregon had relatively open adoption laws, and at 16, I was old enough to access some basic information about my case. I told Linda and George the first was spending the day at the library working on a research project. Instead, I took the bus to downtown Portland and visited the offices of the Department of Human Services. The social worker who helped me, Mrs. Angela Rodriguez, was sympathetic to my desire to understand my background. She explained that while complete adoption records were sealed until I turned 18, she could provide some general information about my case. "Your birth parents died in a car accident when you were 4, she told me, reviewing my file. "You were placed in temporary foster care before being adopted by the Parkers 6 months later. Do you know anything about my birth parents? Their names, what they did for work?" Mrs. Rodriguez consulted her notes. "Michael and Sarah Chin. Your father was an accountant, your mother was a teacher. They lived in southeast Portland." She paused, looking at something in the file that seemed to concern her. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "I'm just noticing some unusual notations in your case file. There are references to a civil lawsuit and settlement funds, but the details are in sealed documents." My heart began racing. "What kind of settlement?" "I can't provide specifics until you're 18, but it appears there was a wrongful death lawsuit related to your parents' accident. The settlement was placed in trust for your benefit." Settlement funds. Money that belonged to me, derived from my birth parents' death. Money that Linda and George had never mentioned in 16 years of raising me. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked. Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head. "I really can't discuss financial details. But when you turn 18, you'll have access to all records and any remaining trust funds." Remaining trust funds. The phrase echoed in my mind during the bus ride home. If there were remaining funds, that implied some of the money had already been spent. But spent on what? And by whom? That evening I confronted Linda and George with what I had learned. "I know about the settlement money," I said as we sat around the dinner table. "I know my birth parents died in a car accident and there was a lawsuit." The color drained from both their faces. Linda set down her fork with trembling hands, while George stared at his plate as if it might provide answers. "Who told you that?" Linda asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Does it matter? What matters is that you never told me. There's money from my parents' death that belongs to me, isn't there? George finally looked up, his expression a mixture of guilt and resignation. It's complicated, Daniel. How is it complicated? Either there's money that belongs to me or there isn't. Linda reached across the table as if to take my hand, but I pulled away. Honey, we used that money to raise you. To provide for your needs all these years. What do you mean you used it? The settlement was $400,000, George said quietly. It was placed in trust with us as trustees to use for your care and upbringing. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. $400,000. A sum that could have paid for college, graduate school, and provided financial security for years to come. Where is it now? I demanded. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. It's gone, Linda admitted. We spent it over the years on your expenses, food, clothing, medical care, housing. But I had been doing math in my head. Even generous estimates of my childhood expenses wouldn't account for $400,000 over 12 years. Unless they had been including their own lifestyle improvements as my expenses. The kitchen remodel was for my benefit? I asked sarcastically. The hot tub? Your car? Dad's motorcycle? We needed those things to provide you with a good home, George said defensively. Everything we did was to create a stable environment for you. You stole my money, I said, the reality finally sinking in. You adopted me to get access to the settlement and then you spent it on yourselves. That's not true, Linda protested, tears starting to flow. We love you. You're our son. If you love me, then where's my college fund? Where's the money that was supposed to secure my future? Neither of them had an answer for that. The weeks following this revelation were the worst of my young life. The people I had trusted and loved had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. They had built their comfortable lifestyle on the blood money from my parents' death while telling me it was gone. But worse than the financial betrayal was the existential crisis it created. Had Linda and George ever truly loved me, or had I been nothing more than a ticket to financial security? Every memory of my childhood was now tainted by the knowledge that their affection might have been motivated by money rather than genuine care. I started researching everything I could about adoption fraud and trustee misconduct. What I learned made me sick. There were legal standards for how settlement funds should be managed for minor children. Trustees were required to use the money primarily for the child's benefit and preserve the principal for the child's future. Personal expenses like luxury vehicles and home improvements were explicitly prohibited. Linda and George hadn't just spent my money. They had violated their legal duties as trustees and potentially committed criminal fraud. When I confronted them with this information, their response was to become defensive and controlling rather than apologetic. You're being ungrateful, Linda said during one heated argument. We gave you a loving home for 12 years. That's worth more than any amount of money. A loving home paid for with my parents' death settlement, I replied. We don't have to justify our decisions to you, George added. We're still your parents and you'll respect us as such. But their authority over me felt hollow now that I understood their motivations. I began to challenge their rules, question their decisions, and demand accountability for the missing money. I also started getting in touch with Mrs. Rodriguez to understand my legal options. This change in our family dynamic created constant tension. Linda and George seemed unable to adjust to having their actions questioned, while I couldn't pretend that everything was normal after learning about their betrayal. The situation reached a breaking point 3 months after my discovery when I demanded to see financial records showing how my settlement money had been spent. I want documentation of every dollar, I told them. I want to see bank statements, receipts, and proof that the money was actually used for my benefit. You're not entitled to that information, George replied. We managed your funds appropriately. Then prove it. Show me the records. Linda and George exchanged glances that I had learned to recognize as their signal for coordinated deception. We don't have to prove anything to you, Linda said finally. You're still a minor and we make the decisions in this family. And when I turn 18? When you turn 18, you can make your own decisions about your life. I realized they were planning to cut me loose the moment I reached legal adulthood, before I could take legal action to recover my money or expose their fraud. They had gotten what they wanted from adopting me, access to $400,000, and now I was becoming a liability. The final months of my time with the Parkers were characterized by escalating conflict and emotional distance. I felt like I was living with strangers who had stolen my identity and my future. They treated me like an ungrateful teenager who didn't appreciate their sacrifices. The end came on a Thursday morning in October, 2 months before my 17th birthday. I had been arguing with Linda about my college plans when she suddenly snapped. "Fine," she said, her voice cold with finality. "If you're so unhappy here, if you think we're such terrible parents, maybe you'd be better off somewhere else." "What's that supposed to mean?" George joined the conversation, and I could see they had discussed this option before. "It means maybe this adoption isn't working out for any of us." I stared at them in disbelief. "You're threatening to give me back?" "We're considering all our options," Linda replied. "You're clearly not happy here, and frankly we're tired of being treated like criminals in our own home." "You are criminals," I said. "You stole my money and lied about it for 12 years. That was apparently the last straw. The next morning, Linda called Mrs. Rodriguez and requested an emergency meeting to discuss disrupting my adoption. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in the same Department of Human Services office where I had first learned about my settlement money, watching the people who had raised me for 12 years hand back my adoption papers like I was a defective product they were returning to the store. "We can't handle him anymore," Linda told Mrs. Rodriguez, not looking at me as she spoke. "He's become impossible to live with. Disrespectful, angry, accusatory. We think he needs professional help that we're not qualified to provide." Mrs. Rodriguez looked confused and concerned. "This is very unusual. Adoption disruptions almost never happen with teenagers who have been in stable placements for over a decade. Daniel has some misconceptions about his trust fund," George explained. "He believes we mismanaged his money, and he's become obsessed with the idea that we owe him something." Misconceptions. I couldn't stay silent any longer. "You admitted you spent the $400,000 settlement on yourselves." "We used appropriate funds for your care and upbringing," Linda corrected. "But Daniel seems to think he's entitled to money that was spent raising him." Mrs. Rodriguez was taking notes, her expression growing more troubled as she listened to our exchange. "Daniel, is it true that you've been having conflicts with your adoptive parents about financial matters?" "It's true that I discovered they stole my inheritance and spent it on luxury items for themselves while lying to me about it for 12 years, I replied. The meeting continued for over an hour, with Linda and George painting me as an ungrateful, disturbed teenager who had become impossible to live with since learning about the settlement money. They claimed they had tried everything to help me adjust, but that I had become fixated on money that was legitimately spent on my care. I tried to explain the truth, that they had violated their duties as trustees and spent my money on personal luxuries while telling me it was gone. But Mrs. Rodriguez seemed overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation and the competing narratives. In the end, the system that was supposed to protect me sided with the adults who had legal authority over my life. My adoption was officially disrupted, and I was placed back into foster care at age 16, 12 years after Linda and George had taken me home as their son. As I packed my belongings into garbage bags, the same way I had arrived at their house as a 4-year-old, Linda made one final attempt at justification. "We did love you," she said, standing in the doorway of what had been my bedroom. "This isn't easy for us either. If you loved me, you wouldn't have stolen my money and then abandoned me when I found out. We gave you a good childhood," George added. "That should count for something." I looked around the room that had been my sanctuary for 12 years. The bed where Linda had read me stories, the desk where George had helped with homework, the walls covered with achievements and memories that now felt hollow and false. "You gave me a childhood paid for with my parents' blood money," I said. "And now that I know the truth, you're throwing me away like garbage." I walked out of their house carrying 2 bags of possessions and the knowledge that the people who had claimed to love me had been planning to abandon me from the moment I learned about their theft. But what Linda and George didn't realize was that they had made one crucial mistake. By disrupting my adoption, they had lost their legal authority over me and my affairs. At 16, I was old enough to have some control over my future, and I was old enough to seek justice for what they had done to me. The Parkers thought they had solved their problem by getting rid of me before I could take legal action. Instead, they had freed me to pursue the truth about my stolen inheritance and expose their fraud to the world. The 4-year-old boy who had trusted them completely was gone. In his place was a teenager who understood exactly how the world worked and was determined to make them pay for their betrayal. My new foster placement was with the Henderson family in Southeast Portland, a kind but overwhelmed couple who specialized in emergency placements for older teens. Margaret and Tom Henderson had been fostering children for 15 years and had seen every type of family crisis imaginable, but even they were shocked by my story. Adoption disruptions are extremely rare, Margaret explained on my first night in their home. Especially for children who have been in stable placements for over a decade. This situation raises serious questions about what really happened. Tom, a retired social worker, was more direct in his assessment. If what you're telling us is true, your adoptive parents committed serious financial crimes. Trustees have legal obligations that can't be ignored just because they don't like being questioned. The Hendersons gave me something Linda and George never had. Validation that my concerns were legitimate and my anger was justified. For the first time in months, I felt like someone believed me and understood the magnitude of what had been done to me. My first priority was gathering evidence of the financial fraud. Mrs. Rodriguez had told me I would have access to complete records when I turned 18, but I couldn't wait 2 years to begin building my case. I needed to start documenting everything immediately while the trail was still fresh. I started by researching public records that might reveal information about the settlement and how it had been managed. Oregon's court system maintained online databases of civil cases, and with some persistence, I was able to locate the wrongful death lawsuit filed on behalf of my birth parents. The case files were sobering to read. The police report described how Robert Morrison, intoxicated and driving at excessive speed, had run a red light and slammed into my parents' Honda Accord. My father died instantly from massive head trauma. My mother lived long enough to be transported to the hospital but died during emergency surgery. I survived because I was strapped into a car seat in the back, protected by the car's safety features and my parents' bodies absorbing the impact. According to medical records, I suffered a broken arm and multiple bruises but no permanent physical damage. The lawsuit that followed was straightforward. Morrison's blood alcohol content was 0.24, 3 times the legal limit. He had been drinking at a corporate event and chose to drive home despite being offered alternative transportation. His insurance company settled quickly to avoid a public trial that would have generated even more negative publicity. The settlement agreement specified that $400,000 would be placed in trust for my benefit, with my adoptive parents serving as trustees responsible for managing the funds for the child's care, education, and future welfare. The money was to be invested conservatively and preserved primarily for my use as an adult. Most importantly, the trustees were required to maintain detailed records of all expenditures and provide annual accounting reports to the court. These reports should have documented exactly how every dollar was spent and demonstrated that the money was being used appropriately. I requested copies of these annual reports from the court clerk's office, expecting to find evidence of the Parkers' financial mismanagement. What I discovered was even more damning. No reports had ever been filed. For 12 years, Linda and George had been legally required to document their use of my settlement money and submit those reports for court review. They had filed nothing. No expenditure records, no investment statements, no accounting of any kind. This wasn't just poor record keeping, it was a deliberate violation of their court-ordered duties as trustees. And it suggested they knew their spending couldn't withstand scrutiny. Armed with this information, I contacted Legal Aid Services of Oregon to discuss my options. They assigned my case to attorney Sarah Kim, a specialist in elder financial abuse and trustee misconduct who had experience with cases involving the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. "This is one of the clearest cases of trustee fraud I've ever seen," she told me after reviewing the documentation I had gathered. "Your adoptive parents had explicit legal duties that they completely ignored while spending your money on personal luxuries. What can we do about it?" Several things. First, we can file a motion with the court to remove them as trustees and demand a complete accounting of the missing funds. Second, we can pursue civil litigation to recover the money they stole. Third, depending on what we discover, there may be grounds for criminal charges. Sarah explained that Oregon law provided strong protections for beneficiaries of trust funds, especially when trustees had violated their fiduciary duties. The penalties for trustee misconduct included not just repayment of misappropriated funds, but also interest, penalties, and potential liability for the trustees' personal assets. They can't just claim they spent your money on raising you, she continued. Trustees are required to use trust funds conservatively and primarily for the beneficiary's future benefit. Personal luxuries like motorcycles and hot tubs are explicitly prohibited expenses. But building a strong case would require detailed financial records that I didn't have access to. We needed bank statements, credit card records, and documentation of major purchases to prove exactly how the money had been spent. That's where the Hendersons proved invaluable. Tom's background in social work had given him connections throughout the child welfare system, and he knew how to navigate bureaucratic obstacles that might have stopped me. "We're going to help you get justice," Margaret told me one evening after dinner. "What happened to you is unconscionable, and the people responsible need to face consequences." Through Tom's contacts, we were able to expedite my access to some adoption records that normally wouldn't be available until I turned 18. These files contained copies of financial documents that Linda and George had submitted during the adoption process, including bank statements showing the initial deposit of my settlement money. The records revealed that the $400,000 had been placed in a savings account at First National Bank of Oregon in November 2007, 6 months after my adoption was finalized. The account was titled Daniel Chin Parker Trust Fund, with Linda and George listed as co-trustees. But subsequent bank statements, which we obtained through a legal subpoena, told a very different story. Rather than being invested conservatively for my future, the money had been systematically withdrawn over the following years to fund the Parkers' lifestyle improvements. The spending pattern was clear and damning. December 2007, $35,000 withdrawal for kitchen renovation. March 2008, $12,000 for Linda's Honda Civic down payment. August 2008, $8,000 for Hawaii vacation. October 2009, $15,000 for George's Harley Davidson. June 2010, $18,000 for backyard hot tub and landscaping. Multiple smaller withdrawals for furniture, electronics, and luxury items. By 2015, the account balance had dwindled to less than $25,000. By the time I discovered the truth in 2023, only $3,200 remained, not enough to buy textbooks for a single semester of college. "This is systematic theft," Sarah explained as we reviewed the financial records. "They treated your settlement money like their personal bank account while telling you it had been spent on your care." The evidence was overwhelming, but I wanted to understand the full scope of their deception. I began researching the actual costs of raising a child to compare against their claims that $400,000 had been necessary for my care. According to USDA estimates, the total cost of raising a child from birth to age 18 was approximately $230,000 for middle-income families. Since I had been adopted at age 4 and was now 16, the Parkers had been responsible for my care for only 12 years, roughly 2/3 of a childhood. Even using generous estimates that included housing, food, clothing, medical care, education, and childcare, the legitimate costs of raising me should have been no more than $180,000. And that was assuming they had borne all expenses themselves without any assistance from state adoption subsidies or other support. The math was clear. The Parkers had stolen at least $220,000 of my settlement money for their personal use while maintaining the legal fiction that they were acting in my best interests. But beyond the financial fraud, I was discovering an even more disturbing truth about my adoption. Through records requests and interviews with people involved in my case, I learned that Linda and George had specifically sought to adopt a child who came with a substantial trust fund. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had handled my original placement, reluctantly confirmed this when I pressed her for details about the adoption process. "The Parkers expressed strong interest in your case specifically after learning about the settlement," she admitted. "At the time, we thought they were just being realistic about the financial responsibilities of adoption." "Did other families want to adopt me?" She hesitated before answering. "Yes. There were several families interested in adopting you. But the Parkers were very persistent, and they seemed financially stable and committed to your welfare." What she didn't say, but what I had pieced together from other sources, was that Linda and George had deliberately targeted children with trust funds or other financial assets. I wasn't their first attempt. They had previously inquired about adopting other children who had inheritance money, but those placements hadn't worked out. I was essentially a financial transaction disguised as a family placement. This revelation was devastating on a personal level, but it also strengthened my legal case. If I could prove that the Parkers had adopted me specifically to access my settlement money, it would demonstrate that their fraud had been premeditated rather than opportunistic. Working with Sarah Kim, I filed a comprehensive legal action against Linda and George in December 2023, 2 months after being returned to foster care. The lawsuit included multiple claims: breach of fiduciary duty as trustees, conversion and theft of trust fund assets, fraud in the adoption process, intentional infliction of emotional distress, violation of Oregon's elder financial abuse statutes. We also filed a motion requesting that the court freeze the Parkers' assets to prevent them from hiding money or transferring property to avoid judgment. The response from Linda and George was swift and predictable. They hired an expensive attorney and claimed that all trust fund expenditures had been legitimate costs of raising me. They portrayed themselves as loving parents who had sacrificed to provide me with a good home, only to be attacked by an ungrateful teenager who didn't understand the real costs of childcare. Their attorney, Robert Walsh, filed a motion to dismiss our lawsuit, arguing that the statute of limitations had expired and that my claims were barred because Linda and George had acted in good faith as my legal guardians. But Sarah had anticipated these defenses. The statute of limitations didn't begin running until I discovered the fraud, which had only happened a few months earlier. And the good faith defense was undermined by their failure to file required accounting reports and their systematic use of trust money for personal luxuries. More importantly, we had evidence that their fraud was ongoing. As recently as 2022, they had withdrawn money from my depleted trust account to pay for George's motorcycle maintenance, claiming it was a transportation expense necessary for my care. The court scheduled a hearing for February 2024 to consider both our motion to freeze assets and their motion to dismiss. In preparation for this hearing, Sarah arranged for expert testimony from financial professionals who would explain how trustees are supposed to manage trust funds and why the Parkers' conduct was inexcusable. But I wanted to do more than just win a legal victory. I wanted to expose what had happened to me so that other children wouldn't fall victim to similar schemes. Through my research, I had discovered that adoption-related financial fraud was more common than most people realized. Unscrupulous individuals sometimes targeted children with trust funds, inheritance money, or Social Security survivor benefits, adopting them specifically to gain access to those funds. The system had few safeguards to prevent this type of exploitation. Social workers conducting home studies focused on emotional and practical readiness for adoption, not financial motivations. Court oversight of trust funds was minimal, relying on trustees to self-report their activities honestly. I began documenting my story in detail, creating a comprehensive record of how the fraud had occurred and what warning signs might have been missed. I also reached out to advocacy organizations that worked on behalf of adopted children and foster youth. One organization, the National Center for Youth Law, was particularly interested in my case because it highlighted systemic failures in how trust funds for minor children were monitored and protected. Your case could lead to important reforms in how adoption agencies screen prospective parents and how courts oversee trust fund management, explained attorney Maria Santos, who worked on policy issues for the organization. What kind of reforms? Better financial background checks for adoptive parents, mandatory training on fiduciary duties, regular court reviews of trust fund management, and penalties for agencies that fail to detect financial exploitation. The possibility that my suffering might prevent other children from experiencing similar betrayals gave me additional motivation to pursue the case aggressively, even when the legal process became overwhelming and emotionally draining. Living in foster care while fighting my former adoptive parents in court was one of the most challenging periods of my life. The Henderson family provided emotional support and stability, but I struggled with trust issues and depression that made it difficult to focus on school and planning for my future. I was also dealing with financial stress. The Parkers had stolen my college fund, and I had no resources to pay for higher education. I qualified for some financial aid as a foster youth, but the amounts were modest compared to what I would have had if my settlement money had been properly managed. Sarah Kim was working on a contingency fee basis, meaning she wouldn't be paid unless we won the case. But even with free legal representation, there were costs associated with the litigation. expert witnesses, document processing, court fees, that strained the Henderson family's limited resources. The emotional toll was even greater than the financial burden. Every court filing, every legal document, every conversation with attorneys was a reminder of how thoroughly I had been betrayed by the people who claimed to love me. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if I should just accept what had happened and try to move on with my life. The legal process was consuming enormous amounts of time and energy that I could have been using to focus on my education and future goals. But every time I considered giving up, I remembered the casual way Linda had handed back my adoption papers, as if I were a defective product being returned to the store. I remembered George's claim that providing me with a good childhood should somehow excuse their theft of my inheritance. And I remembered the 16-year-old version of myself, standing in that social services office, learning for the first time that his entire family had been built on a foundation of financial fraud. That boy deserved justice. The other children who might fall victim to similar schemes deserved protection. And Linda and George Parker deserved to face consequences for their calculated betrayal of a child who had trusted them completely. As the court date approached, I felt ready to tell my story to a judge and demand accountability from the people who had stolen my past and my future. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, but the weight of the moment made it feel enormous. Judge Patricia Hawkins presided from the bench, her expression serious as she reviewed the extensive case files spread before her. To my left sat Sarah Kim, organized and confident. Across the aisle, Linda and George Parker sat with their attorney, Robert Walsh, looking older and more defeated than I remembered. This was the first time I had seen my former adoptive parents since the day they returned me to social services 4 months earlier. Linda kept glancing in my direction with what might have been regret, while George stared straight ahead, his jaw set in the stubborn expression I knew well from childhood arguments. This is a complex case involving serious allegations of trustee misconduct and financial exploitation of a minor, Judge Hawkins began. I've reviewed the preliminary evidence and I must say, the documentation raises troubling questions about the management of the plaintiff's trust fund. Sarah stood to present our case, her voice clear and confident as she outlined the evidence we had gathered. Your Honor, this case represents one of the most egregious examples of trustee fraud I have encountered in my practice. The defendants adopted Daniel Chin Parker specifically to gain access to his $400,000 wrongful death settlement, then systematically stole that money over 12 years while claiming it was being used for his care. She presented a timeline of the Parkers' spending, complete with bank records, purchase receipts, and photographs of the luxury items they had bought with my money. The evidence shows that defendants spent over $220,000 of trust funds on personal luxuries including kitchen renovations, motorcycles, hot tubs, and luxury vacations. Meanwhile, they failed to file a single required accounting report in 12 years, violating their court-ordered duties as trustees. Judge Hawkins studied the financial records with obvious dismay. Mr. Walsh, how do your clients explain these expenditures? Robert Walsh stood, clearly uncomfortable with the evidence he had to defend. Your Honor, my clients maintain that all expenditures were legitimate costs associated with providing Daniel with a loving home and proper care. Raising a child requires significant investment in housing, food, transportation, and family activities. Mr. Walsh, Judge Hawkins interrupted, I see expenditures here for a $15,000 motorcycle, a $35,000 kitchen renovation, and multiple luxury vacations. How exactly do these benefit the child? The motorcycle provided reliable transportation for family activities. The kitchen renovation improved the home environment where Daniel was being raised. The vacations provided important family bonding experiences. Sarah rose for her rebuttal. Your Honor, trustees have specific legal obligations that cannot be satisfied by creative rationalizations. Trust funds must be managed primarily for the beneficiary's future benefit, not converted into lifestyle improvements for the trustees. She presented testimony from Dr. Amanda Foster, a financial expert who had analyzed the Parkers' spending patterns. Based on standard calculations for child-rearing costs, Dr. Foster explained, the legitimate expenses for raising Daniel from age 4 to 16 should have been approximately $140,000 to $180,000, including housing, food, clothing, medical care, and education. The defendants spent more than twice that amount, with the excess going entirely to personal luxuries that provided no benefit to the child. But the most damaging testimony came from Mrs. Rodriguez, the social worker who had handled my original adoption placement. Under oath, she revealed details about the Parkers' adoption process that had been hidden from me for years. The defendants specifically inquired about children who had trust funds or settlement money, she testified reluctantly. They expressed particular interest in Daniel's case after learning about the size of his settlement. At the time, we interpreted this as financial responsibility, but in retrospect, their motivations appear to have been different. Judge Hawkins leaned forward. Are you saying the defendants targeted this child specifically because of his financial assets? That appears to be the case, Your Honor. They had previously inquired about adopting other children with inheritance money, but those placements didn't proceed. The revelation that I had been targeted for adoption because of my money rather than loved for who I was hit me like a physical blow, even though I had suspected it. Hearing it confirmed under oath made the betrayal feel fresh and devastating all over again. Robert Walsh attempted to minimize this testimony by arguing that the Parkers' interest in financial matters was simply practical planning, but Judge Hawkins seemed unimpressed by these explanations. The court also heard testimony from Margaret and Tom Henderson about my condition when I was returned to foster care at age 16. Daniel was devastated and confused, Margaret testified. He couldn't understand how the people who had raised him could abandon him simply for asking questions about money that belonged to him. The psychological impact of this betrayal has been severe. When it came time for Linda and George to testify in their own defense, their explanations were weak and contradictory. Linda took the stand first, clearly nervous as Sarah questioned her about specific expenditures from my trust fund. Mrs. Parker, can you explain how purchasing a $15,000 motorcycle benefited Daniel's care and upbringing? George needed reliable transportation to take Daniel to activities and appointments. But the family already owned 2 cars, correct? Yes, but... And the motorcycle was a recreational vehicle that Daniel was not allowed to ride due to safety concerns? Linda struggled to answer. It was for family use. Mrs. Parker, did you ever consider that spending Daniel's inheritance money on luxury items might be inappropriate? Everything we did was to provide Daniel with a good home. Including the $18,000 hot tub that was installed in your backyard? That was for the family's enjoyment and relaxation. Paid for with money intended to secure Daniel's future? Linda's composure began to crack. We loved Daniel. Everything we did was because we loved him. George's testimony was even worse. When confronted with the systematic pattern of spending, he became defensive and hostile. Mr. Parker, why did you never file the required annual accounting reports with the court? We didn't know we were supposed to do that. Sarah presented him with copies of the court orders that explicitly required annual reports. These documents were provided to you when you became trustees. They clearly state your reporting obligations. George studied the papers, his face reddening. We must have missed that. For 12 consecutive years? We were busy raising a child. Too busy to comply with court orders regarding the management of his money? We managed his money fine. Mr. Parker, how do you explain the fact that a $400,000 trust fund intended to secure Daniel's future has been reduced to $3,200? George's anger finally erupted. We gave that boy everything. A good home, food, clothes, education. We loved him like our own son. If he can't appreciate that, if he's going to sue us over money, then maybe we made a mistake adopting him in the first place. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Hawkins stared at George with obvious displeasure. Mr. Parker, are you suggesting that providing basic care to an adopted child justifies stealing his inheritance money? George realized he had made a mistake, but the damage was done. That's not what I meant. But it was exactly what he had meant, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. When the testimony concluded, Judge Hawkins took a brief recess before delivering her ruling. I sat in the hallway with Sarah and the Hendersons, trying to process everything I had heard. How do you think it went? I asked Sarah. Their own testimony destroyed their case, she replied. When George said maybe they made a mistake adopting you, he essentially admitted that their love was conditional on your gratitude for their theft. 20 minutes later, we reconvened for Judge Hawkins' decision. This court has rarely seen such a clear-cut case of trustee misconduct and financial exploitation, she began. The defendants were entrusted with managing substantial funds for a child's benefit, and they systematically violated that trust for their own personal gain. She outlined her findings methodically. First, the defendants failed to comply with court-ordered reporting requirements for 12 consecutive years, demonstrating a deliberate disregard for their legal obligations. Second, they spent trust funds on personal luxuries that provided no benefit to the beneficiary, in clear violation of their fiduciary duties. Third, they targeted the plaintiff for adoption specifically because of his financial assets, treating him as a source of income rather than a child in need of a loving home. Fourth, when confronted with evidence of their misconduct, they abandoned the child rather than accept accountability for their actions. Judge Hawkins paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the courtroom. The court finds the defendants liable for breach of fiduciary duty, conversion, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They are hereby ordered to repay the full amount of misappropriated trust funds, plus interest and penalties, totaling $547,000. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with relief. The judge had understood exactly what had happened and was holding Linda and George accountable for their crimes. But Judge Hawkins wasn't finished. Additionally, this court is referring this case to the district attorney's office for investigation of potential criminal charges. The defendant's conduct appears to constitute theft, fraud, and exploitation of a vulnerable person under Oregon law. Linda began crying audibly while George sat in stunned silence. The reality that they might face criminal prosecution in addition to the civil judgment was clearly overwhelming. Furthermore, the judge continued, this court finds the defendant's treatment of the plaintiff after he discovered their fraud to be particularly reprehensible. Abandoning a child for questioning the theft of his inheritance demonstrates a complete absence of genuine parental love or concern. She addressed me directly for the first time during the proceedings. Daniel, I want you to know that what happened to you was not your fault. You deserved parents who would protect and nurture your future, not exploit it for their own benefit. This court hopes that justice being served will help you heal from this betrayal and move forward with your life. The emotional weight of her words, combined with the relief of finally being believed and vindicated, overwhelmed me completely. I broke down crying in the courtroom, feeling simultaneously vindicated and devastated by the formal confirmation of my family's betrayal. After the hearing, Linda approached me in the hallway, her face streaked with tears. Daniel, please, she said, reaching toward me. We did love you. Maybe we made mistakes with the money, but we genuinely loved you. I looked at the woman who had read me bedtime stories, baked birthday cakes, and comforted me through childhood fears. The same woman who had stolen my inheritance and abandoned me when I discovered the truth. If you loved me, I said quietly, you wouldn't have spent my parents' death settlement on luxury items for yourselves. And you definitely wouldn't have thrown me away when I found out. We can work this out as a family, she pleaded. We can pay the money back and try to rebuild our relationship. We're not a family, I replied. We never were. I was just a financial opportunity that you exploited for 12 years. George joined the conversation, his expression hard and unrepentant even in defeat. You ungrateful little, he started, but Tom Henderson stepped between us. That's enough, Tom said firmly. You've done enough damage to this boy. As the Parkers walked away to consult with their attorney about the judgment and potential criminal charges, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Justice had been served, but it couldn't undo 12 years of lies or restore the childhood I had lost. The aftermath of the court ruling brought both vindication and new challenges. The Parkers were ordered to pay $547,000 but claimed they didn't have the assets to satisfy the judgment. Their house was mortgaged, George's motorcycle had depreciated significantly, and they had spent most of the stolen money on consumable items like vacations and home improvements. Sarah filed motions to garnish their wages and seize their assets, but recovery would be a long process. In the meantime, I was still living in foster care with minimal resources for college or my future. However, the publicity surrounding my case attracted attention from advocacy organizations and donors who wanted to help. The National Center for Youth Law established a scholarship fund in my name to help other aged-out foster youth pursue higher education. More importantly, my case led to legislative reforms in Oregon requiring better oversight of trust funds for minor children and stricter screening of prospective adoptive parents' financial motivations. 6 months after the court ruling, the district attorney filed criminal charges against Linda and George for theft, fraud, and exploitation of a vulnerable person. They eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges and received sentences of 3 years probation and community service. As part of their plea agreement, they were required to make restitution payments and attend counseling for financial crimes. They were also placed on a registry preventing them from adopting or fostering children in the future. On my 18th birthday, I aged out of foster care but remained close to the Henderson family, who had provided me with more genuine love and support in 2 years than the Parkers had in 12. Margaret and Tom offered to let me stay with them while attending Portland State University, where I planned to study social work. My goal was to become an advocate for children in similar situations, working to prevent financial exploitation of vulnerable youth and helping survivors of family betrayal rebuild their lives. The settlement money that was eventually recovered, combined with scholarships and financial aid, allowed me to pursue my education without the crushing debt that might have otherwise limited my options. I was finally able to use my parents' legacy for its intended purpose, securing my future and honoring their memory. 3 years after the court case, I received a letter from Linda Parker. She claimed to have found religion in counseling and wanted my forgiveness for what she called our family's mistakes. I read the letter once, then destroyed it without responding. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive, and some relationships are too damaged by lies to rebuild. Instead, I focused on building a new life based on truth, justice, and genuine relationships. I graduated college with honors, began working as a child advocate, and eventually started a foundation to help other young people who had been financially exploited by their families. The 4-year-old boy who had trusted Linda and George Parker completely was gone. In his place was a man who understood that family is defined by love and protection, not by legal documents or financial opportunity. My birth parents had died trying to protect me from a drunk driver. My adoptive parents had spent 12 years stealing the legacy my real parents had left behind. But in the end, justice was served, and I was able to build a life that honored both my parents' memory and my own values. Sometimes the worst betrayals teach us the most valuable lessons about trust, resilience, and the difference between genuine love and calculated exploitation. The end. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was exploiting you financially? How did you find the courage to seek justice despite the emotional cost? Share your stories of standing up to family financial abuse in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more tales of overcoming betrayal and finding justice. Remember, true family protects your future, not profits from your vulnerability. Thank you for following Daniel's journey from abandoned victim to empowered advocate. May we all find the strength to choose truth over comfort and justice over false peace. I should have seen it coming. The familiar smirk, the practiced condescension, the way he adjusted his custom-made suit before delivering what he thought would be another crushing blow to his underachieving sister. "Still running that little shop of yours, Emma?" Michael asked, swirling his 18-year-old scotch in a crystal glass that probably cost more than what he assumed I made in a month. We were at our parents' monthly family dinner, a tradition that had become more of a status report than a family gathering. The mahogany dining table that had witnessed 20 years of sibling rivalry now held another elaborate spread, another opportunity for Michael to showcase his success as Boston's youngest partner at Preston and Hayes, the city's most prestigious law firm. I looked down at my simple black dress, no designer label, no flashy jewelry, and smiled. "Yes, still running it." "Fascinating," he drawled, not meaning it at all. "And what is it again? Some sort of online thing?" Our mother, Elizabeth, shot me a concerned look from across the table. She'd never understood why I'd turned down law school to start my own business. In her world, success had a very specific look: degrees from elite universities, corner offices, and country club memberships. "E-commerce solutions," I said quietly, cutting into my perfectly cooked steak. "We help businesses scale their online presence." Michael laughed, that sharp, dismissive sound I'd grown up hearing. "Right, like those dropshipping schemes college kids run from their dorm rooms. At least it keeps you busy." I thought about the contracts sitting on my desk, the acquisition deals pending approval, the international expansion plans that would reshape global e-commerce. But I stayed quiet. Timing was everything. "Michael just made partner," our father James announced proudly, as if we hadn't heard it the first 50 times. youngest in the firm's history. And, Michael added, straightening his tie, we're about to announce our biggest client ever. Revolutionary tech company. Absolutely massive deal. I took a sip of water, hiding my smile. If only he knew. That's wonderful, dear, Mom beamed. Emma, perhaps Michael could help you formalize your little business. Make it more legitimate. I'm managing, Mom. Managing isn't thriving, Michael interjected. You know, one of our junior associates has a sister who's looking for admin work. Maybe she could show you how a real business operates. The crystal chandelier above us cast shadows across the formal dining room, highlighting the wall of achievements: Michael's law degree, his bar admission, his press features. My space on that wall had remained conspicuously empty since I'd left corporate law to start my company. Tell us about this big client, Dad urged Michael, his eyes gleaming with pride. Michael sat up straighter, if that was possible. Can't reveal too much yet, but think tech giant. Think revolution in e-commerce. Think billions. I dabbed my lips with the linen napkin, remembering the email I'd sent that morning to Preston and Hayes, confirming our company as their new client. The largest contract in the firm's history, with one specific condition: I would reveal myself as the CEO only during the first official meeting. Speaking of business, Michael continued, did you hear about Sarah Peterson? Remember her from high school? She just sold her startup for 8 figures. Now that's how you run a business. He looked at me pointedly. Some people just understand scale. Mom jumped in, ever the peacekeeper. Emma's business is different. More modest. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with it? Michael scoffed. Mom, she's wasting her potential. Harvard Law wanted her. She could have been somebody. I thought about my office, not the small storefront they thought I worked from, but the real one. 40 stories above Boston's financial district, with a view that made Michael's corner office look like a storage closet. The irony would be delicious if it wasn't so sad. How many employees do you have now? Michael asked, though he clearly didn't care. Still just you and that college friend of yours? We've grown a bit, I said. In reality, we had over 3,000 employees across 12 countries, but who was counting? Growth is relative, I suppose, he smirked. Hey, if you ever need legal advice about closing up shop, first consultation's free. Family discount. Dad chuckled at his joke while Mom busied herself with rearranging the table settings. The weight of their assumptions hung in the air like expensive perfume, overwhelming, suffocating. Actually, I said, setting down my fork, I might need a law firm soon. For expansion. Michael nearly choked on his scotch. Expansion? Emma, let's be realistic. You run a glorified website builder from a strip mall office. What kind of expansion could you possibly need? If he only knew that my glorified website builder had revolutionized e-commerce infrastructure, that we'd developed proprietary technology that Amazon was trying desperately to replicate, that our latest valuation had added another 0 to an already impressive number. You never know, I said softly. Things change. Some things don't, he countered. Some people are meant for greatness, others. He gestured vaguely in my direction. Find their level. The dinner continued, a carefully choreographed dance of achievements and announcements. Michael's new penthouse, his membership at the exclusive Bristol Club, his recent feature in Boston Business Monthly. Emma, Mom said during dessert, I ran into Joyce Thompson at the club. Her daughter's company is hiring entry-level marketing positions. Should I pass along your resume? I thought about the stack of resumes on my desk, Harvard MBAs and Silicon Valley veterans desperate to join my company. About the acquisition offers from tech giants that I'd turned down. About the fact that Joyce Thompson's daughter had actually applied for a position with us last month. We'd politely declined. Thanks, Mom, but I'm good. Are you, though? Michael pressed. Really? When was the last time you took a vacation? Bought something nice for yourself? Had any real success? I looked at my brother, really looked at him. Behind the expensive suit and practice swagger, I saw something I'd missed before. Fear. Not of me, not yet, but of falling behind, of losing his position at the top of the family hierarchy. Success isn't always visible, I said quietly. He laughed again, louder this time. In our world, it is. That's why some of us are featured in Business Monthly while others. He gestured at my simple outfit, my modest watch, my unassuming presence. Others just dreamed small. Little did he know that tomorrow his world would shatter. That his big client announcement would become the moment his carefully constructed superiority crumbled. That his little sister's small business would reveal itself to be the tech giant his firm had been pursuing for months. But for now I just smiled and asked Mom to pass the dessert. After dinner, as I walked to my car, a practical Volvo that Michael loved to mock, my phone buzzed. A text from my CFO, acquisition papers ready. Law firm meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. Everything set for the reveal. I looked back at the house, at the window where Michael stood bragging to Dad about tomorrow's meeting. About how he'd personally brought in the biggest client in the firm's history. About how this would cement his legacy. Ready to approve your first billion-dollar expansion, big brother? I whispered to myself, starting the car. The next 24 hours would change everything. But tonight I'd let him have his moment. Let him believe in his superiority one last time. Because tomorrow in his own conference room he'd learn what real success looked like. And it wouldn't be wearing a designer suit. 5 years earlier I sat in a real strip mall office, but not for the reasons my family assumed. It was where I first discovered the fundamental flaw in global e-commerce infrastructure. A problem so basic, yet so profound that solving it would change everything. I remember the day I quit Preston and Hayes, where I'd been a junior associate on track for partnership. Michael, already rising through the ranks, had smirked from his office as I carried out my small box of belongings. Finally accepting that law isn't for you, he'd called out. Don't worry, not everyone's cut out for real success. What he didn't see was the patent application in my bag, or the business plan that had kept me up for months, or the early code that would eventually become the backbone of my company, Nova Technologies. The strip mall office was perfect cover. A small front operation while the real work happened in a secured facility 2 buildings away. My first team consisted of 5 people, all brilliant, all overlooked by traditional tech companies. We worked 18-hour days, fueled by cheap coffee and expensive dreams. Your brother's making partner, Mom would remind me during our weekly calls. And you're still playing with websites. Playing. If only they knew that while Michael celebrated court victories, I was rebuilding the foundation of digital commerce. That while he boasted about billable hours, I was filing patents that would be worth billions. The first breakthrough came 9 months in. We developed a system that could process e-commerce transactions 50 times faster than existing platforms, with 99.99% accuracy. When we tested it, the results were so impressive that our servers crashed. I remember calling my first major investor, Sarah Chin, at 3 a.m. We did it, I said, my hands shaking. It actually works. Her response was immediate. How much do you need? 20 million to start. He didn't hesitate. Done. But why aren't we announcing this? I thought about Michael's condescending smile, about Mom's worried glances, about Dad's dismissive waves. Not yet, I said. Let's build first. Prove everything. Then we'll talk about announcements. The company grew exponentially but quietly. We moved the real operations to a secure facility outside Boston, maintaining the strip mall office as a front. Every time my family asked about my business, I'd direct them there, to the small space with its modest sign and basic furniture. Meanwhile, Nova Technologies was revolutionizing e-commerce. Our system wasn't just faster, it was smarter, more secure, more scalable. Major retailers started adopting it. Then international companies. Then governments. Still working late at your little shop? Michael would text while I was actually in meetings with tech giants and government officials. Someone has to, I'd reply, sitting in my real office 40 stories above Boston watching my empire grow. The valuation hit $1 billion 2 years in. I celebrated by buying a penthouse in the building next to Michael's law firm. Not that I ever told them. I watched from my window as he left work each day, proud in his success, completely unaware that his struggling sister could buy his firm 10 times over. Then came the global expansion. Nova's system was revolutionizing markets in Europe, Asia, South America. We maintained absolute privacy. No press releases, no social media presence, no public face. Our clients knew who we were, but we required strict NDAs. I wanted to succeed on our terms, not for show. Emma needs to be realistic, I overheard Mom telling her friends at the country club. Not everyone can be as successful as Michael. I was in the club that day, meeting privately with tech executives in a back room, signing contracts worth more than the club's annual revenue. The irony wasn't lost on me. The decision to approach Preston and Hayes came after careful consideration. We needed a top law firm for our next phase of expansion, and they were the best. The fact that Michael was there? That was just poetic justice. Your brother's firm is handling the Novity account, Dad mentioned at dinner one night, bursting with pride. Biggest tech client they've ever had. I nodded, remembering the email I'd just sent approving the contract. We'd used our holding company name, Novity, keeping Nova Technologies hidden until the right moment. The company grew beyond even my expectations. Our technology was processing trillions in transactions. Major platforms depended on our infrastructure. We were, quietly but definitively, becoming indispensable. You should see my new office, Michael bragged last week. Corner suite, executive bathroom, full staff. I looked out from my actual office, entire floor, private elevator, global command center, and smiled. Sounds nice. The decision to reveal everything wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. About showing that success doesn't always wear designer suits or need constant validation. Sometimes it works quietly, builds steadily, changes the world without needing applause. Yesterday I signed the final papers. Nova Technologies would officially engage Preston and Hayes, with one condition: I would reveal myself as CEO during the first meeting. Michael's meeting. The one he'd been bragging about for weeks. This client will make my career, he'd boasted at dinner. Tech company worth billions. Revolutionary stuff. I let him talk, let him bask in his perceived coup. Let him believe one last time that he had achieved something I never could. My phone buzzed, another text from my CFO. Everything's set for tomorrow. Board approved the expansion plan. $3.2 billion initial investment. I looked at my reflection in the office window. Simple black dress, minimal jewelry, quiet confidence. Tomorrow, in Michael's precious conference room, his entire worldview would shift. But tonight I had work to do. Real work. The kind that changes the world without needing permission or praise. Because tomorrow wasn't about showing up my brother. It was about showing him, showing all of them, that success doesn't need announcing. It just needs to be real. The morning of the reveal, I dressed with careful consideration. The same style of simple black dress I always wore, but this one from my private collection. Oscar de la Renta, not that anyone would notice or care. A subtle reminder to myself that power doesn't need to announce itself. Preston and Hayes occupied the top floors of a gleaming tower in downtown Boston. As my driver pulled up to the entrance, I could see Michael standing in the lobby with the other partners, practically bouncing with anticipation. Their biggest client meeting. His crowning achievement. Ms. Wilson, the security guard greeted me, using my holding company's surname. The partners are expecting you. I noticed my brother's head turn at the sound of a new arrival, then dismiss me just as quickly. After all, what could this unassuming woman in a simple dress possibly have to do with his big moment? Running late, Emma? He called out, that familiar condescension in his voice. The cleaning staff entrance is around back. Several partners chuckled. I smiled, walking past them toward the executive elevator. Actually, I'm right on time. This is a private elevator, Michael said sharply. For executives and important clients only. I held up my access card, the one sent specifically to the CEO of Nova Technologies. His eyes widened slightly, confusion crossing his face. There must be some mistake, he started, but the elevator was already closing. See you upstairs, brother, I said softly as the doors shut. The conference room was immaculate, wall-to-wall windows, leather chairs, and a spectacular view of Boston Harbor. The managing partners were already seated, along with their senior team. Michael rushed in moments later, straightening his tie. The CEO of Novity should be here any moment, he announced importantly. This is a transformative day for Preston and Hayes. I took my seat at the head of the table, opening my laptop. Shall we begin? Michael frowned. We need to wait for Dash. The CEO of Nova Technologies? I interrupted quietly. She's already here. The room went silent. Michael's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror. No, he whispered. I stood, smoothing my simple dress. Hello, everyone. I'm Emma Wilson, founder and CEO of Nova Technologies, also known as Novity. I believe we have some contracts to discuss. The managing partner recovered first, his face breaking into a broad smile. Ms. Wilson. We had no idea. That's impossible, Michael interrupted. Emma runs a small web design shop. She's nobody. Actually, I said, clicking a button on my laptop that activated the room's presentation screen, I run this. The display's filled with Nova's real statistics. Global reach. Market penetration. Valuation. Revenue streams. With each number, Michael seemed to shrink further into his chair. As you can see, I continued calmly, we're planning a significant expansion. We'll need comprehensive legal services. Your firm comes highly recommended. $3 billion. Michael choked, staring at the investment figures. But you drive a Volvo. Good safety ratings, I replied. Now about the contracts. The next hour was surreal. I walked them through Nova's expansion plans while Michael sat in stunned silence. His carefully constructed worldview crumbling with each slide, each figure, each casual mention of billions. Of course we'll need a dedicated team, I said, wrapping up. Unfortunately, given our history, I don't think Michael would be the best fit to lead it. The managing partner nodded quickly. Completely understood, Ms. Wilson. We'll assemble our top team. Emma. Michael finally found his voice. Why didn't you tell me? I looked at my brother, really looked at him. The expensive suit suddenly seemed cheap. The practiced swagger replaced by genuine uncertainty. Would you have believed me? I asked quietly. Or would you have dismissed it as another small dream from your struggling sister? The meeting ended with signed contracts and shell-shocked partners. As everyone filed out, Michael remained seated, staring at the presentation still glowing on the screens. All this time, he muttered. The little shop. The simple clothes. Success doesn't need to be visible to be real, I said, gathering my things. Some of us prefer to let our work speak for itself. Mom and Dad, they don't know? They will now. I handed him my business card, the real one with Nova's logo and my CEO title. Family dinner should be interesting this month. As I walked toward the door, he called out, Wait. I've been horrible to you. Yes, I agreed, turning back. You have. How did you build all this without anyone knowing? I smiled slightly. The same way I did everything else, quietly, efficiently, and without needing anyone's approval or praise. The ride down was silent. Through the elevator's glass walls, I could see Boston spreading out before me, my real office tower in the distance. The strip mall where it all began barely visible on the horizon. My phone buzzed, a message from Mom. Darling, did something happen? Michael just called, sounding strange. Said we need to talk about you. Another text followed. And why are you on CNBC right now? I stepped out into the lobby just as the news started breaking. The mysterious Nova Technologies, backbone of global e-commerce, finally revealing its CEO. My photo appearing on financial news networks. My little shop, suddenly recognized as the tech giant it had always been. The security guard who had dismissed me earlier now stood at attention. Ms. Wilson, he said, this time with genuine respect. Outside, my driver held the door to my real car. Not the Volvo but the Rolls-Royce I used for business meetings. As I slid into the leather interior, I caught sight of Michael watching from the lobby, his world forever changed. My phone buzzed again, the family group chat exploding with messages, questions, confusion. Dad sharing news links. Mom sending a stream of exclamation points. Relatives who had dismissed me for years suddenly remembering they had always believed in me. But I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I directed my driver to the strip mall, the place where it all began. The small office still stood there, modest and unassuming. A reminder that greatness doesn't need grand announcements or constant validation. Sometimes it just needs silence, determination, and the patience to wait for the right moment to show the world and your family what you've built. As the sun set over Boston, casting long shadows across the city I had quietly helped reshape, I thought about success, real success. Not the kind that needs corner offices and constant praise, but the kind that changes the world without asking permission. My phone buzzed one final time. Michael, I'm sorry. For everything. And I'm proud of you, sis. I smiled, watching the lights come on across the city, knowing that somewhere in those gleaming towers, my brother was finally seeing me, really seeing me for the first time. And that, more than any contract or valuation, felt like true success. Real estate is a man's business, Amanda, my brother James said, leaning back in our father's leather chair. His feet were propped on the mahogany desk where Dad had taught us both about property values and market trends. The clients won't take you seriously. The developers won't respect you. You'll embarrass the family name. I stood there in my carefully chosen suit, my real estate license and MBA diploma clutched in my hands like shields. At 28, I'd spent years preparing to join Callahan Properties, our family's century-old real estate empire. Now my older brother, interim CEO since Dad's heart attack, was dismissing me like I was a child asking for candy. Dad promised, I started. Dad's not here, James cut me off. He's recovering and I'm in charge. The board agrees with me. This isn't some cute boutique agency selling suburban homes to soccer moms. We handle major commercial properties, skyscrapers, office complexes. It's not suitable for someone like you. Someone like you. The words burned. I graduated top of my class, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I've already closed 3 major deals independently. Using Dad's connections, he scoffed. Listen, stick to residential. Maybe open a small agency focusing on homes. Leave the real business to those who can handle it. Behind him, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see downtown Chicago's skyline. Buildings our grandfather had helped develop, properties our father had acquired. The empire I dreamed of helping expand since I was old enough to understand what our family did. James, I tried one last time. We both know Dad wanted us to run this together. He stood up, straightening his custom suit. Dad's old-fashioned ideas about equality don't work in today's market. The board needs strong, decisive leadership. Not diversity hires. The diploma crumpled in my clenched fist. Is that what I am? A diversity hire? You're my sister and I love you, he said with the condescending smile I'd grown to hate. But this is business. Go find something more appropriate for your talents. I turned to leave, then stopped. You know what Dad always said about pride before the fall? Are you threatening me? He laughed. With what? Your vast experience? Your deep industry connections? Face it, Amanda. Without the Callahan name, you're nothing in this business. I walked out of that office with my head high, past the family photos lining the halls, past the plaque commemorating our grandfather's founding of the company in 1923, past the surprised look of our longtime receptionist who'd known me since I was in pigtails. In the elevator, I finally let the tears fall. But they weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of rage, of determination, of absolute clarity about what I needed to do. My phone buzzed, Dad's physical therapist, updating me on his progress. He was recovering slowly, but doctors said it would be months before he could return to work. Months during which James would continue consolidating his power, pushing through his vision of an all-male leadership team. Outside, Chicago's spring wind whipped at my hair as I walked to my car. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from Michael Chin, one of the independent developers I'd worked with on my previous deals. Heard what happened? Their loss. Let's talk. Lunch tomorrow. I smiled, wiping away the last tears. Michael was known for backing underdogs, for seeing potential others missed. And he had no love for the old boys club that dominated Chicago real estate. That night, in my apartment, I spread out everything I'd collected over the years: market analyses, property reports, demographic studies, development trends. Knowledge James thought I couldn't possibly understand because I was just a girl. My laptop pinged with an email from Sarah Martinez, my former roommate now working at an investment bank. Ready to discuss that business plan whenever you are. Another ping, Peter Goldman, a mentor from my MBA program, heard about Callahan Properties' latest mistake. Want to explore other opportunities. James thought I had no connections. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I opened a new document and typed, strategic plan, breaking the glass ceiling one property at a time. By midnight, I had the outline of a plan. By dawn, I had the beginnings of a revolution. Dad had always said real estate wasn't just about properties. It was about seeing potential others missed. About being patient, strategic, willing to play the long game. Well, brother dear, I thought as I watched the sun rise over the city skyline, let's play. I had 5 years of trust fund money saved up, funds James probably assumed I spent on shoes and handbags. I had a network of industry contacts I'd built quietly while he was busy playing golf with board members. And most importantly, I had something he'd never understand: the motivation of someone who'd been underestimated their entire life. My phone buzzed one more time, a message from Dad. "Don't let them stop you, princess. Show them what Callahan women are made of." I texted back a heart emoji, then got to work. James wanted a man's business? Fine. I'd give him something better, a woman's revenge. The next morning, I met Michael Chin at a small cafe far from the business district where Callahan Properties loomed. No need to alert James to my moves just yet. "So," Michael said, sliding a thick folder across the table. "Ready to make your brother eat his words?" I opened the folder and smiled. Inside were details of 3 struggling properties in up-and-coming areas, properties Callahan Properties had dismissed as not worth the effort. The previous owners over-leveraged during the last boom, Michael explained. Banks are quietly looking to offload them. With the right vision and the right partners, I added, studying the numbers. "I've got 4 other investors interested," he continued. All of them, coincidentally, quite tired of the old boys network running the city's real estate. 2 were women who'd faced similar discrimination. One was a minority developer who'd been shut out of major deals. The 4th was a young tech millionaire looking to diversify his portfolio. "We call ourselves the Outsiders Club," Michael grinned. "Want to join?" By the end of lunch, I had my first partnership agreement. By the end of the week, I had my first property, a rundown warehouse in an area the city had tagged for tech development. James, predictably, couldn't resist commenting when he heard. "A warehouse?" He laughed during a family dinner. "How cute. Planning to store all the houses you'll be selling." Mom looked uncomfortable. Dad, still recovering but sharp as ever, watched silently. "Something like that," I smiled, cutting my steak with precise movements. 3 months later, when Google announced they were looking for satellite office space in exactly that area, James' laughter stopped. The warehouse, with its high ceilings and industrial charm, was exactly what tech companies wanted. I didn't sell, though. Instead, I leveraged that property to acquire 2 more in the same area. James might control the family company, but he'd forgotten one crucial lesson Dad taught us. Real estate was about anticipating trends, not following them. My phone buzzed constantly now, developers, investors, tech companies all wanting in on what we were building. The Outsiders Club grew, quietly acquiring overlooked properties across the city. "You need to be careful," Dad warned during one of our private lunches. "James is starting to notice." "Good," I replied, showing him our latest acquisition, a string of supposedly worthless properties along the proposed new transit line. Properties Callahan Properties had publicly dismissed as high risk. Dad smiled, the same smile he'd worn when I'd sold my first property at 19. "You always did see things differently." I had a good teacher. The next 2 years passed in a blur of deals, renovations, and strategic planning. While James focused on flashy downtown properties, my network focused on the edges, the emerging neighborhoods, the transitional zones, the places where real money was made if you were patient enough. Then came the tech boom. Suddenly, every major company wanted Chicago offices away from the traditional business district. They wanted character, authenticity, connection to up-and-coming neighborhoods. They wanted exactly what we had. "Did you see the latest market report?" Sarah asked during our weekly strategy meeting. "Your brother's company just posted their first quarterly loss in 15 years. I had seen it. I'd also seen the panicked board meetings through the glass windows of their downtown office. James had bet big on traditional commercial properties, just as the market was shifting toward exactly the kind of spaces we'd been quietly accumulating. "Time for phase 2? Michael asked. I nodded. We'd spent 3 years building our portfolio, forming partnerships, establishing ourselves as the go-to developers for the new economy. Now it was time to make James understand exactly what he'd dismissed. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Callahan Properties had leveraged several of their prime downtown properties to fund new acquisitions. When those acquisitions underperformed, they needed cash fast. "They're selling the Madison Street properties," Peter reported. "All 6 buildings. Quietly, through a proxy to avoid market panic. The Madison Street properties. Our family's first major commercial success. The buildings our grandfather had started with, that our father had expanded." "How much?" I asked. More than we have liquid, Sarah admitted. But if we leverage everything we've built, if we bring in our entire network. Michael pulled out his calculator. We could do it. I looked around the room at my team, my real family. The people who'd believed in me when my own brother wouldn't. Make the calls, I said. All of them. The next month was intense. Secret meetings, complex financial arrangements, carefully structured deals. Our entire network mobilized, pulling together resources, calling in favors. The day we closed the deal, I sat in my office looking at the signed papers. Through some delicious twist of fate, James would have to be the one to sign over the properties. The final humiliation. He arrived at the lawyer's office looking confident, probably assuming some big corporation was the buyer. Then he saw me. What is this? He demanded. This, I smiled, is business. Man's business, I believe you called it. His face went through a fascinating series of expressions as our lawyer explained the details. His signature when it finally came was shaky. The rent notices go out next week, I told him as he stood to leave. I think you'll find the new rates more competitive. He turned back, face red. You can't. Can't what? Run a major commercial real estate portfolio? Make strategic acquisitions? Build a network of investors? Funny, that's exactly what you said 5 years ago. How did that work out for you? The door closed behind him with a satisfying click. I sat there alone for a moment, running my fingers over the property deeds. Then I took out my phone and dialed. Dad? Remember what you used to say about karma in real estate? His laugh was worth everything. Should I save you a seat at the next board meeting? No need, I smiled. I've got my own empire to run. 3 months after acquiring the Madison Street properties, I sat in my new office, coincidentally located in one of the buildings I now owned, directly across from Callahan Properties headquarters. Through my window I could see James pacing in his office, probably staring at the latest market reports. They weren't good. For him anyway. Your brother's here, my assistant announced through the intercom. Says it's urgent. I smiled, straightening the family photo on my desk. The last one taken before Dad's heart attack, before James showed his true colors. Send him in. James burst through the door, clutching a stack of papers. Gone was the perfectly pressed suit and carefully maintained appearance. He looked desperate. You have to stop this, he demanded, throwing the papers on my desk. They were our new lease agreements for all Callahan Properties satellite offices, the ones they'd been forced to move to after selling their prime locations. Stop what? I asked innocently. Charging market rates? Isn't that what you taught me about real business? These rates are impossible. You're trying to bankrupt us. No, James. I'm doing business. Just business. Isn't that what you said? No room for family sentiment in real estate. He collapsed into a chair, his arrogance finally cracking. What do you want? Want? I stood, walking to my wall of achievements, deals closed, properties acquired, awards won. All under my own name, not the Callahan banner. I already have what I want. A successful company. A respected position in the industry. Everything you said I couldn't have because I was just a girl. The board is meeting next week, he said quietly. They're considering changes. Of course they were. Callahan Properties stock had dropped 30% since my takeover of the Madison Street properties. Their major tenants were fleeing to our newer, better located buildings. Their development pipeline had dried up because they'd missed the market shift we'd anticipated. Changes like what? I asked, though I already knew. They want to merge, he admitted. With your company. I sat back down, savoring the moment. Interesting. And who suggested this idea? Dad. Now that was surprising. Dad had stayed carefully neutral during my rise, offering advice but never directly interfering. He says it's time to reunite the family legacy, James continued. Under new leadership. New leadership? He swallowed hard. Yours. The silence that followed was heavy with 5 years of history, his dismissal, my exile, the sweet revenge of success. Let me get this straight, I said finally. You want me to save the company you said I wasn't qualified to work for? To take over the position you said a woman couldn't handle? I was wrong, he whispered, and I could see how much those words cost him. My phone buzzed, a text from Dad. Time to heal the family, princess. On your terms. I looked at James, really looked at him. Behind the desperation I saw something new: respect. Maybe even understanding. The merger will happen, I said firmly. But with conditions. He straightened. Name them. First, the board gets restructured. Equal gender representation. No more old boys club. He nodded. Second, we implement a mentorship program for women and minorities in real estate. Full funding, real opportunities. Another nod. Third. I paused, picking up the family photo. You apologize. Not just to me. To every woman in the company you've overlooked or underestimated. Publicly. Is that all? He asked, a hint of his old sarcasm returning. No. I smiled. You're going to work for me. Really work. Starting from project management, learning the new market realities. Proving your value just like I had to. His face reddened, but he didn't argue. Welcome to the new Callahan Properties, brother dear. Hope you're ready to learn how a woman does business. The merger announcement made headlines. Female developer takes over century-old family firm. The photo they used showed me standing with our leadership team, diverse, talented, united. James did apologize publicly and sincerely. Then he started his new role, learning from the ground up how the industry had changed. Surprisingly, he was good at it when he stopped underestimating people based on gender. Dad cried at the first board meeting of the merged company. Your grandfather, he said, hugging me, would be so proud. Not because you proved them wrong, but because you did it your way. A year later, I stood at the podium during the Real Estate Development Association's annual conference, accepting the Developer of the Year award. My speech was simple. 5 years ago, I was told real estate was a man's business. Today, I own the companies of the men who told me that. But this isn't a story about revenge. It's about change. About seeing potential where others see limitations. About building not just properties but opportunities. In the audience, James applauded with the rest. He was learning, growing, becoming the brother I'd always hoped he'd be. My phone buzzed, another major acquisition opportunity. Below it, a message from Dad. Ready to show them what Callahan women can really do? I smiled, looking out at the city skyline, our skyline. Real estate is everyone's business, I concluded my speech. And the future belongs to those brave enough to break through glass ceilings, one building at a time. The standing ovation wasn't just for me. It was for every woman who'd ever been told she couldn't. Every person who'd been dismissed, underestimated, pushed aside. James met me at the exit. Next project meeting's in 10 minutes, he said, handing me a coffee. Try not to be too hard on your little brother? I laughed, linking my arm through his. Now where would the fun be in that? Together we walked toward the future. Not as brother and sister, not as man and woman, but as equals in the business we both loved. Sometimes the best revenge isn't in destroying your enemies, but in teaching them a better way to be. The private dining room at Le Cirque buzzed with the familiar sound of my brother's success stories. Another bonus, another promotion, another reason for our parents to beam with pride at their golden child. James Walker, youngest VP at Continental Bank, their crown jewel in designer suits. I sat quietly at the corner of the table, picking at my salad while James held court. The merger's practically done, he announced, swirling his $1,000 wine. Once we acquire that tech startup, Continental's digital banking division will be unstoppable. Our father nodded approvingly. Always thinking ahead, son. That's why you're where you are. I suppressed a smile, thinking about the email I'd received that morning. The one marked strictly confidential from my actual office. Not the small fintech consulting firm my family thought I ran. What about you, Sophia? Mom asked, her tone carrying that familiar mix of concern and disappointment. Any progress with your, what do you call it? Digital payment solutions, I supplied. And yes, we're growing. James snorted into his wine. Growing? Last I checked, you were working out of a WeWork space. Not exactly Wall Street. That WeWork space was actually a mail drop. My real office occupied the top 3 floors of a building in the financial district, but they didn't need to know that. Not yet. Not everyone measures success by their office address, James. He laughed, that sharp, dismissive sound I'd grown up hearing. Keep dreaming, sis. But while you're playing with your little startup, some of us are making real moves in the industry. If he only knew about the moves I was making. About the meetings I'd been having with his bank's board of directors. About the papers sitting in my hotel safe that would redefine both our futures. Speaking of moves, our father interjected, James tells me Continental might have some entry-level positions in their tech department. If you're interested, Sophia. I'm good, Dad. I took a sip of water. But thanks. You can't keep chasing these startup fantasies forever, James said. At some point you need to join the real world. The real world. As if he had any idea what I'd built while he was climbing Continental's corporate ladder. As if he knew that his precious bank's digital transformation depended entirely on my approval. Because tomorrow morning when the markets opened, everyone would learn that Shadow Financial, the fintech giant that had been silently acquiring regional banks for the past 3 years, was actually my company. And our latest acquisition? Continental Bank. James had been so busy bragging about his merger that he hadn't even noticed who was buying his bank. I saw your company's website, he continued, scrolling through his phone. Cute logo, but let's be honest, you're barely more than a payment processing app. Mom touched my arm. There's no shame in admitting you need help, dear. James could put in a good word. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I'm exactly where I need to be. Where you need to be. James scoffed. You're 32 working in some shared office space, probably making what? 6 figures if you're lucky? While I'm about to close the biggest deal in Continental's history. I checked my watch, 15 hours until the announcement. 15 hours until my brother learned that his biggest deal was actually his company being acquired by his little sister. More wine. The waiter appeared at James's elbow. Of course. Put it all on my card. Got to celebrate success while little sis here figures out her life. I watched him hand over his Continental Bank executive card with flourish. The same bank that, as of 9:30 tomorrow morning, would be a subsidiary of my company. The waiter returned moments later, his expression carefully neutral. I apologize, sir, but your card appears to be declined. That's impossible, James snapped. Run it again. System shows a hold due to institutional changes, the waiter explained. Perhaps another card? James's face reddened. Institutional changes? I'm a VP at Continental. There are no changes I don't know about. I caught the waiter's eye and handed him my card. Matte black, unmarked except for a small shadow logo. His eyes widened slightly in recognition. Of course, Ms. Walker, he whispered, low enough that only I could hear. I should have realized. Your bank just acquired his. The irony wasn't lost on me. In less than a day, every card in James's wallet would technically be issued by my company. Don't worry about it, James, I said softly. Dinner's on me. The next morning I sat in my real office. A corner suite on the 52nd floor with views stretching from Manhattan to Brooklyn. The wall of screens before me displayed various financial news channels, all counting down to the market opening. My phone had been buzzing since dawn. First, a text from James. Something weird happening at Continental. Emergency board meeting called. Might be about the merger. Then from Dad, your brother's going to make headlines today. That's what happens when you work hard the right way. I smiled, adjusting my Armani blazer as my executive team filed into the office. Unlike the simple clothes I wore to family dinners, today's outfit was pure power. No more hiding. Everything's in place, my CEO Diana reported. Press embargo lifts in 20 minutes. CNBC is standing by for your interview. And Continental's board? Signed the final papers an hour ago. Their executives haven't been notified yet. I nodded, thinking of James probably sitting in his office, completely unaware that his morning meeting would change everything. Ms. Walker, my assistant called through the intercom. Your brother's trying to reach you. Says it's urgent. Not now, I replied. We have more important things to handle. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the first alert flashed across Bloomberg. Breaking. Shadow Financial to acquire Continental Bank in $8.2 billion deal. My phone exploded immediately. James, holy shit. Shadow bought us? Meeting starting now. Dad, are you seeing this? Your brother's bank is being acquired. Mom, call us. James isn't answering. I turned my attention to the largest screen, where CNBC's morning anchor was speaking. In a stunning move, Shadow Financial has announced its acquisition of Continental Bank, marking its largest purchase to date. But the bigger story might be Shadow's CEO, who's finally stepping into the public eye. The doors burst open. Diana rushed in. "They're ready for your live interview." I stood, straightening my jacket as the camera crew made final adjustments. The red light blinked on. Joining us now exclusively is Sophia Walker, CEO of Shadow Financial and, as we've just learned, one of the youngest billionaires in finance. Ms. Walker, quite an entrance you've made. I smiled directly into the camera, knowing exactly who would be watching. "Sometimes the biggest moves happen in complete silence," I replied. "Shadow Financial has spent 3 years revolutionizing digital banking. Continental is just our latest step." Sources say Continental's executives were unaware of who was really buying their bank. Was that intentional? We believe in letting our technology and results speak first. Names and titles tend to create preconceptions. My phone kept vibrating. James was calling repeatedly now. I could imagine the scene in Continental's boardroom, his world turning upside down in real time. The interview continued but was interrupted by my assistant. "Ms. Walker, Continental's VP of Digital Banking is in the lobby. Says he's your brother." I muted my phone as another call came in. "Let him up. Have security ready." Minutes later, James burst into my office, still wearing yesterday's suit, face flushed with a mixture of shock and anger. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, then stopped short, taking in the surroundings. The executive office. The news crews. The Shadow Financial logo everywhere. "Hello, James," I said calmly. "I believe you're late for your board meeting." "This is how? Remember my cute payment processing app?" I gestured to the screens showing Shadow's stock price soaring. It evolved. He sank into a chair, staring at the financial headlines still rolling across the screens. "All this time," he whispered, "when I was telling you to get a real job. I had one. Several, actually. Shadow Financial owns 12 banks now. Continental makes 13. Does Dad know?" "He will in about 10 minutes. I'm having a car pick them up for the press conference." James ran his hands through his hair, his carefully maintained composure cracking. "What happens to me?" he asked finally. I picked up a folder from my desk. "That depends. The VP of Digital Banking position at Continental will be restructured. But we do have an opening in our innovation department. Lower title, of course. No executive privileges. But a chance to learn banking from the ground up. The right way." "Lower title?" he sputtered. "You can't demote me. I'm your brother." "Exactly," I replied coolly. "And if I'd let that influence my decision, I wouldn't be where I am. This isn't personal, James. It's business. Real business." The intercom buzzed again. "Your parents have arrived, Ms. Walker." The look on my parents' faces as they entered my office was worth every holiday dinner I'd spent being lectured about real careers. Dad stopped mid-stride, his eyes traveling from the executive suite to the wall of screens still announcing my acquisition of his precious son's bank. "Sophia." Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "What is all this?" "This," I gestured around me, "is what playing with my little startup actually looks like." Diana appeared at the door. "Ms. Walker, the press conference starts in 20 minutes. Board members are gathering in the main hall." "Thank you, Diana." I turned back to my family. "We should talk quickly. I have a company to run. Well, several companies now." Dad found his voice first. You're the one who bought Continental?" "Shadow Financial bought Continental," I corrected. "I just happen to own Shadow Financial, along with 12 other banks and the digital payment platform you all thought was a hobby." James, still slumped in his chair, let out a bitter laugh. "All those times I offered to help you get a real job." "I remember," I said, pulling up Continental's performance reports on my tablet. "Like last Christmas, when you said I was wasting my potential on a startup. I was finalizing the acquisition of First Western that week. Or last month's dinner, when you suggested I apply for an entry-level position. I was in negotiations to buy your bank. But your apartment, your clothes, that shared office space." Mom stammered. "Were exactly what you expected to see," I replied. "The WeWork address receives my mail. I live in the penthouse at the Harrison. The startup office you visited was a front. This," I gestured to the luxurious space around us, is where I actually work. Why didn't you tell us? Dad demanded. Would you have believed me? I asked quietly. Or would you have done what you always did? Dismiss it, minimize it, explain why James's path was better? The silence that followed was deafening. Speaking of paths, I continued, turning to James, have you made a decision about the innovation department position? You're really going to demote your own brother? Dad interjected. No, I said firmly. I'm offering a position to a banker whose digital division has underperformed for 6 consecutive quarters. The fact that he's my brother is irrelevant. Irrelevant. Mom gasped. We're family. Family, I echoed, standing to walk to the windows. Like when James told everyone at Thanksgiving that my company was cute? Or when Dad suggested I needed real-world experience at Easter. That kind of family. The intercom buzzed again. 5 minutes to press conference, Ms. Walker. I turned back to them. I have to go announce this acquisition to the world. You're welcome to attend. There are reserved seats in the front row. But understand this, from now on things will be different. Different how? James asked, finally looking up. No more condescension. No more helpful suggestions about my career. No more assumptions about my potential. I straightened my jacket. From today forward, you'll see exactly who I am and what I've built. Whether you can handle that reality is up to you. And if we can't? Dad challenged. Then you'll miss out on quite a lot, I replied simply. Shadow Financial is just the beginning. Next month we launch our international division. The month after that our blockchain platform goes live. Your choice if you want to watch it happen from the outside. Diana appeared again. They're ready for you. I walked to the door, then paused. Oh, and James? About your Continental Executive credit cards. They'll be deactivated at midnight. Your new company card will have a significantly lower limit. Standard policy for non-executive positions. The press conference was a blur of cameras and questions. I announced the acquisition, outlined Shadow's vision for digital banking, and watched our stock price climb higher with each word. From the front row, my family sat in stunned silence as I detailed the empire I'd built while they were busy doubting me. That evening, as I sat in my penthouse reviewing the day's coverage, my phone lit up with a text from James. I'll take the innovation department job. And, I'm sorry. For everything. Then from Dad, we were wrong. So wrong. Can we have dinner this week? Anywhere you choose. I smiled, thinking of all the family dinners where they'd lectured me about success. Now they wanted to dine with the real me. The CEO, the acquirer, the billionaire they'd never seen coming. My response was simple. Sunday. My place. I'll send a car. And James, bring your new company card. Dinner's on you this time. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's proving yourself right. And letting them pay for the privilege of watching. The smell of turkey and disappointment filled my childhood home as I set down my overnight bag in the familiar entryway. The walls were lined with the same family photos they'd displayed for years, but noticeably absent were any pictures of me from the past 5 years. Not surprising, considering my family saw those years as my lost period. I'm Madison Foster, though my family had taken to calling me the dropout ever since I left Stanford in my junior year. At 28, I was the black sheep who'd thrown away a promising pre-med track to chase what my father called computer nonsense. Madison. My mother's voice carried from the kitchen, sweet but strained. You're early, dear. We weren't expecting you until dinner. I checked my watch. 2:47 p.m. Thought I'd help with preparations, Mom. She emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes automatically scanning my appearance. Jeans, a simple sweater, sneakers. I could see her mental calculation. Another disappointing outfit from her disappointing daughter. That's thoughtful, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Your brother and Jessica are already here. And your cousin Trevor flew in from New York this morning. Of course Trevor was here. The golden child who'd followed the family script perfectly. Harvard Law, partnership at a prestigious firm, marriage to the right kind of woman. Everything I'd failed to achieve. The living room buzzed with the familiar energy of family judgment disguised as concern. My brother David sat in Dad's old armchair, his wife Jessica perched on the arm, both looking like they'd stepped out of a catalog for successful young professionals. Trevor stood by the fireplace, gesticulating as he told some story about his latest courtroom victory. Madison. David's voice boomed with false enthusiasm. Look who finally crawled out of. Where are you living now? Still Mom's basement. The room erupted in polite laughter. Jessica covered her mouth delicately, while Trevor grinned like he'd just heard the joke of the century. I have my own place, I replied calmly, settling into the corner of the sofa. A small apartment downtown. How small? Jessica asked with the kind of concern that wasn't really concern. These days with rent prices. It's fine, I said, taking a sip of the coffee Mom had pressed into my hands. Suits my needs. Trevor joined the conversation, loosening his expensive tie. Madison, I have to ask, and please don't take this the wrong way, but what exactly are you doing these days? Career-wise, I mean. Here it came. The annual interrogation disguised as family interest. I work in software development, I said simply. David leaned forward. Like, fixing computers? More like building applications and systems. Ah. He nodded as if he understood, though clearly he didn't. Is there money in that? I mean real money. I thought about the 7-figure deals I'd closed in the past month, about the company valuation that had hit $2.8 billion last quarter, about the acquisition offers I'd been fielding from tech giants. But I just smiled. I get by. Dad emerged from his study, still wearing his reading glasses, holding what looked like financial documents. At 64, Richard Foster commanded respect in every room he entered. He'd built Foster & Associates into one of the region's most successful accounting firms, and he expected his children to follow similarly traditional paths to success. Madison, he nodded curtly. Good to see you. You too, Dad. He settled into his chair, the unofficial signal that serious family discussion was about to begin. Now that everyone's here, I thought we should discuss some family business. My stomach tightened. Family business discussions never went well for me. As you know, Dad continued, the firm has been growing steadily. David's been instrumental in expanding our corporate client base, and I'm proud to announce that he'll be taking over as managing partner next year. Everyone applauded appropriately. David beamed, Jessica squeezed his arm, and Trevor raised his coffee cup in a toast. That's wonderful news, Mom said, though she shot a quick glance at me. Both our children doing so well. The uncomfortable pause that followed was deafening. Well, Trevor said, clearly trying to fill the silence, 1 out of 2 isn't bad. More polite laughter. I maintain my smile, used to being the punchline. Madison, Dad's voice took on that tone I remembered from childhood lectures. I've been thinking about your situation. It's not too late, you know. Dr. Patterson's son is doing very well in medical device sales. I could make a call, get you an interview. That's kind of you, Dad, but I'm happy with my current work. David snorted. Happy. That's what people say when they've given up on success. David, Mom warned gently. No, Mom, someone needs to say it. David stood up, warming to his theme. Madison had everything handed to her. Stanford, pre-med track, full family support. And she threw it all away for what? To play with computers in some basement apartment. I don't live in a basement, I said quietly. Might as well, Jessica chimed in. I mean, what kind of future is there in whatever it is you do? Trevor nodded sagely. The tech bubble always bursts eventually. Remember the dot-com crash? Madison, you need to think long-term. Build something stable like David has. I looked around the room at their concerned faces, their absolute certainty that they knew what was best for me. 5 years of this. 5 years of being the family disappointment while I built something they couldn't even comprehend. You know, I said, reaching for my phone, I've been meaning to show you something. Please don't tell me you're finally on Instagram, Jessica said. Social media isn't a career, Madison. I ignored her, scrolling through my messages until I found the one I was looking for. My publicist sent this earlier. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. Publicist. Dad's eyebrows rose. What do you need a publicist for? I was about to answer when the doorbell rang. That'll be the mail, Mom said, standing. I'll just grab it. Perfect timing. I'd been tracking the delivery all week. Mom returned with an armload of mail, flipping through the usual bills and catalogs. Then she stopped, staring at something in her hands. Forbes magazine, she said, confused. We don't subscribe to Forbes. My heart rate picked up. Actually, that's probably for me. For you. David laughed. What could Forbes possibly want with? He stopped mid-sentence as Mom held up the magazine. There, on the glossy cover, was my face. Professional headshot, confident smile with the headline, "The 28-year-old dropout who built a billion-dollar empire." The silence that followed was absolute. Trevor's coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. Jessica's mouth fell open. David's face went from smug confidence to pale confusion in seconds. "Madison." Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Is this you?" I stood up, walking over to take the magazine from her trembling hands. "Yeah, Mom. That's me." The cover photo showed me in the sleek conference room of Nexus Dynamics, the company I'd built from nothing in my basement apartment. The tagline read, "How Madison Foster revolutionized cloud computing while her family thought she was failing." "This is impossible," David said, his voice cracking. "This has to be some kind of mistake." I opened the magazine to the feature article. "Want me to read it out loud?" No one answered. They just stared. Madison Foster left Stanford in her junior year against her family's wishes, choosing to pursue what seemed like an impossible dream, revolutionizing how companies store and access data in the cloud. 5 years later, her company Nexus Dynamics has a valuation of $2.8 billion and contracts with 40% of Fortune 500 companies. Trevor sank into the nearest chair. Nexus Dynamics. I've heard of Nexus Dynamics. They handle data security for half the law firms in Manhattan. Foster's journey began in a 400-square-foot apartment she rented with her life savings. I continued reading. Working 18-hour days, she developed proprietary algorithms that would eventually become the foundation of the most secure cloud storage system in the world. Dad removed his glasses, cleaning them repeatedly. "Madison, I don't understand. If this is true, why didn't you tell us?" I closed the magazine, meeting his eyes. "Would you have believed me?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "Last Christmas," I continued, "when I tried to explain what I was working on, you told me to stop living in fantasy land. 2 Thanksgivings ago, when I mentioned my company had signed its first major client, you suggested I see a therapist about my delusions of grandeur." Jessica found her voice. But you dress so simply. You drive that old Honda. You live in that tiny apartment." "Because that's all I need," I said. "Success isn't about showing off. It's about building something meaningful." David was scrolling frantically through his phone. This says your company just acquired 2 competitors for $300 million each. Last month," I confirmed. "We're expanding into Europe next quarter." Trevor looked up from his own phone, his face pale. "Madison, it says here that you're worth more than all of you combined," I finished gently. "Yes." Mom sank into her chair, still staring at the magazine cover. "Sweetie, why didn't you share this with us? We're your family." I thought about all the family dinners where I'd been ignored or mocked. All the times they'd assumed I was failing without asking how I was actually doing. All the years of being treated like the family disappointment. "Because," I said carefully, "sharing requires trust. And trust requires people to listen without judgment." Dad was reading the article now, his face cycling through emotions I'd never seen before. "It says you employ over 800 people. That you've revolutionized data security for government contracts." "The Pentagon is my biggest client," I said. "We handle classified information storage for 3 branches of the military." The room fell silent again. Outside, I could hear neighborhood kids playing in the leaves, their laughter a stark contrast to the stunned quiet inside. "Madison," Trevor said slowly, "I recommended Nexus Dynamics to my firm 6 months ago. You've been handling our most sensitive case files." I nodded. "I know. I saw your name on the client list." "You knew and you didn't say anything? Would it have changed how you treated me?" He had no answer for that. Jessica was still scrolling through her phone. "There are articles about you in TechCrunch, Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review. Madison, you're famous." "I'm successful," I corrected. "There's a difference." David stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "This doesn't make sense. If you're worth billions, why do you live like what? Like someone who doesn't need to prove her worth through material possessions." He turned back to face me. But the apartment, the car. The apartment is 5 blocks from my office. The car is reliable and efficient. I own what I need, not what impresses people. Mom was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her face. Oh, Madison. What have we done? You assumed, I said softly. You looked at external appearances and made judgments without asking questions. Dad closed the magazine carefully. The article mentions your philanthropy work. A foundation for underprivileged students. The Foster Education Initiative, I said. We've provided full scholarships to 200 students so far. Kids who want to pursue non-traditional paths but don't have family support. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Trevor cleared his throat. Madison, I owe you an apology. We all do. Do you? I asked. Or are you just sorry because now you know I'm successful by your definition? He flinched. That's fair. I walked to the window where David stood, looking out at the neighborhood where I'd grown up feeling like I never quite fit in. 5 years ago, I said, when I left Stanford, I tried to explain my vision to all of you. I tried to share my excitement about what I was building. But every conversation ended with you telling me I was making a mistake, that I was throwing my life away. We were trying to protect you, Mom said through her tears. From what? From following my passion? From building something revolutionary? From success? Dad stood up, walking over to where I stood. Madison, I don't know what to say. We've been terrible to you. I turned to face him. Not terrible. Just blind. How can we make this right? I thought about that question. Could this be made right? Could years of dismissal and mockery be erased by one magazine article? You can start, I said, by understanding that success comes in many forms. That intelligence isn't measured by following traditional paths. That sometimes the person you think is failing is actually succeeding beyond your comprehension. Jessica spoke up hesitantly. The article mentions you're working on something new. Some kind of quantum computing project. For the first time all day I smiled genuinely. Quantum data storage. If successful, it'll make current cloud computing look like dial-up internet. And you're doing this yourself? David asked. With a team of the brightest minds in the industry. Most of them also college dropouts, actually. Trevor laughed, but it was different now. Not mocking but amazed. Of course they are. There's something else, I said, reaching for my phone. Something I haven't told you. They waited, probably wondering what other bombshells I might drop. MIT called last week. They want to offer me an honorary doctorate. Harvard too, actually. And Stanford wants me to give the commencement speech next year. Mom started crying harder. Oh, sweetie. We've been such fools. You've been protective parents, I said gently. Misguided, maybe, but your intentions came from love. Dad picked up the Forbes magazine again, staring at my photo. You look confident here. Happy. I am happy. I love what I do. I love the problems I solve, the team I work with, the impact we're making. And we almost convinced you to give it up, he said quietly. He tried. But some dreams are too big to abandon, even for family approval. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was contemplative, heavy with realization and regret. Madison, David said finally, would you tell us about your company? Really tell us? I want to understand what you've built. I looked around the room at their faces. No more smirks or condescending smiles. Just genuine curiosity and perhaps the beginning of respect. It started, I said, settling back into my corner of the sofa, with a simple observation about how inefficiently most companies handle data storage. For the next 2 hours I talked. Really talked for the first time in years. I explained the technology, the business model, the vision for the future. They listened without interruption, asking thoughtful questions, slowly beginning to understand the magnitude of what I'd accomplished. When I finished, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the living room. Dinner's probably ruined, Mom said, but she was smiling. We could order pizza, I suggested. Pizza sounds perfect, Dad said. Though I suspect you could afford something fancier. I laughed. I could buy the pizza place, but sometimes simple is better. As Mom called for pizza delivery, Trevor pulled me aside. Madison, I need to ask you something. That night last Christmas when I told you to stop dreaming and get realistic. I remember. I was jealous, he admitted. I've always followed the safe path, done what was expected. I've never had the courage to chase something truly ambitious. I studied his face. It's not too late, you know, to chase something bigger. At 32? With a mortgage and responsibilities. Some of my best developers are in their 40s. Experience brings perspective. He nodded thoughtfully. Maybe we could talk more about that. About your industry, the opportunities. I'd like that. The pizza arrived and we gathered around the dining room table. The same table where I'd endured years of lectures about responsible career choices. But tonight felt different. Tonight I wasn't the family disappointment. I was Madison Foster, CEO of Nexus Dynamics, featured on the cover of Forbes magazine. More importantly, I was finally seen by my family for who I really was. There's one more thing, I said as we finished eating. The article mentions I'm expanding operations. I'm looking for someone to head our new East Coast legal department. Trevor nearly choked on his pizza. Are you? Offering you a job? Only if you're interested. It would mean leaving your current firm, taking a risk, joining something unconventional. He looked at his plate, then back at me. What would I be doing? Helping to write the legal framework for technologies that don't exist yet. Negotiating contracts with governments and corporations. Building something from the ground up. That sounds... He paused, terrifying and amazing. Most worthwhile things are. David was watching this exchange with interest. What about accounting? Do billion-dollar companies need accountants? I smiled. They need CFOs. People who understand both traditional finance and the unique challenges of scaling a tech company rapidly. Are you offering me a job too? I'm offering you the chance to help build something revolutionary. If you think you can handle working for your little sister. He laughed, and for the first time in years it sounded genuine. I think I can manage that. As the evening wound down, my family walked me to the door. The same entryway where I'd arrived hours earlier as the family disappointment. Now everything had changed. Madison, Mom said, hugging me tightly, I'm so proud of you. Not because of the money or the magazine covers, but because you had the courage to follow your vision when no one believed in you. Even when your own family didn't believe in you, Dad added quietly. I'm sorry for that. We're all sorry. I hugged them back, feeling years of tension and hurt beginning to dissolve. We're family. We'll figure it out. As I drove home in my reliable Honda Civic, I thought about the path that had led me here. The lonely nights coding in my tiny apartment. The rejections from investors who didn't understand my vision. The family dinners where I'd sat silent while they planned my life for me. But mostly I thought about tomorrow. About the quantum computing project that could change everything. About the team of brilliant misfits I'd assembled. About the future we were building together. My phone buzzed with a text from my publicist. Forbes article already trending on social media. Interview requests pouring in. You ready for this? I smiled, typing back, ready. The next morning I woke up to 47 missed calls and 200 plus unread emails. Word was spreading fast. By noon, 3 major news outlets wanted interviews and my company's stock price had jumped 15%. But the message that made me smile was a simple text from David. Reviewed Nexus Dynamics financial reports. Holy shit, Madison. When can we talk about that CFO position? Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's success so complete, so undeniable, that it transforms not just how others see you but how they see themselves. My family would never again assume that unconventional meant unsuccessful. They'd learn to look deeper, to ask questions, to consider that maybe, just maybe, the person they'd written off as a failure was actually the most successful person they knew. Me. I was just getting started. The dropout who disappointed her family was about to change the world. The sound of champagne glasses clinking and pretentious laughter filled my mother's expansive garden. Her annual summer soiree was in full swing, with the usual suspects in attendance. Doctors, lawyers, and business executives, all eager to outshine each other with tales of their latest achievements. I stood near the fountain, swirling my sparkling water and watching my older sister Victoria hold court among her physician friends. Even from here I could read her lips as she introduced her husband, head of neurosurgery at Boston General. Emma. My mother's voice carried across the garden. Come here, darling. People are asking about you. No, they weren't. But I walked over anyway, plastering on my professional smile. The same one I used when dealing with difficult parents during conferences. This is my younger daughter, Emma, Mom said to her circle of friends, her smile tight. She's a teacher. The way she said, teacher, made it sound like a terminal illness. Oh, how sweet, said Mrs. Harrison, wife of some hedge fund manager. At the elementary school, isn't it? High school, I corrected. Advanced physics and mathematics. Must be so rewarding, another woman simpered, clearly searching for something nice to say. Working with children, shaping young minds and all that. Victoria drifted over, champagne in hand. Though some of us shape actual brains, she quipped, earning appreciative chuckles from the group. I bit back a response. They didn't need to know about the revolutionary educational AI system I'd been developing for the past 5 years. Or about the quantum computing applications I'd integrated into my teaching methodology. Or about the fact that tomorrow Harvard University was announcing the largest educational research grant in its history. Still correcting papers and manning the detention hall? Victoria asked, her voice dripping with false concern. It must be so fulfilling. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. The display showed Dr. Richardson, Harvard president. Excuse me, I said, stepping away from the group. I need to take this. Probably a parent complaint, Victoria stage whispered. You know how they get about grades these days. I walked to a quiet corner of the garden, aware of the curious eyes following me. Dr. Mitchell, President Richardson's voice was warm. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important? Not at all, sir. Just a family gathering. Excellent. I wanted to personally confirm tomorrow's announcement. The board is thrilled with your research results. Your AI-driven educational platform is revolutionary. The implications for global education access are staggering. I glanced at my family and their friends, still watching me with mixture of pity and dismissal. The official announcement will be tomorrow at 10 a.m., he continued. $100 million, Dr. Mitchell. The largest educational research grant in Harvard's history. And it's all yours. Thank you, sir. I'm honored. Don't be modest, Emma. You've earned this. Your work combining quantum computing with adaptive AI learning systems. It's going to change education as we know it. The Nobel Committee has already expressed interest. As he spoke, I watched Victoria regaling her audience with another tale of her surgical prowess. Mom was beaming with pride as always. Will you be at tomorrow's ceremony? President Richardson asked. Wouldn't miss it. Excellent. Oh, and Emma, we'd like to offer you a full professorship. Your high school has done amazing work as your testing ground, but it's time to think bigger. Much bigger. I ended the call and turned back toward the party, where my mother was now introducing Victoria to the wife of a state senator. My brilliant daughter, the neurosurgeon, she was saying. She's performing groundbreaking surgery next month. I checked my watch. In less than 24 hours, every major news outlet would announce my name. The quiet high school teacher who'd revolutionized educational technology. The developer of an AI system that could adapt to any student's learning style in real time. The recipient of Harvard's largest research grant ever. But for now, I just smiled and sipped my water, letting them believe what they wanted about the just a teacher in their midst. Pass the salt, Einstein, Victoria smirked across the dinner table. The garden party had dwindled to just family, Mom, Dad, Victoria, her surgeon husband Mark, and me. Mom had insisted we stay for dinner, probably hoping I'd be inspired by more tales of Victoria's medical brilliance. You know, Victoria continued, cutting into her salmon, I had the most fascinating brain surgery today. Removed a tumor while the patient was awake. Much more exciting than explaining fractions, I'm sure. I checked my phone under the table. CNN had just sent the pre-release briefing about tomorrow's announcement. The headline made me smile. Revolutionary AI education system receives historic $100 million grant. Emma phones away at dinner, Mom chided. It's rude. I'm sure those test papers can wait. Speaking of work, Victoria leaned forward. Did I mention I've been nominated for the Carter Innovation Award in neurosurgery? Mom, remember how I always said I'd change the world? Of course, darling. You were always so ambitious, even as a child. Mom beamed. Unlike. She glanced at me, leaving the comparison unspoken. My phone buzzed again. A message from my lead researcher at Harvard. Dr. Mitchell, MIT and Stanford are already requesting collaboration meetings. The quantum educational interface is generating unprecedented interest. Emma, Dad spoke up, his voice gentle. Have you considered Victoria's suggestion about getting a real teaching credential? Private schools pay better than public ones. I looked up from my phone. I have all the credentials I need, Dad. But surely you want more from life? Mom pressed. You're brilliant, dear. You could have been anything, a doctor like your sister, a lawyer, something significant. Victoria nodded sagely. Remember when we were kids? Emma was always the smart one. Such a waste of potential, really. But I suppose someone has to teach basic math to teenagers. My quantum computing algorithm could solve complex mathematical equations faster than any human brain surgeon. The AI system I developed could process and adapt to individual learning patterns in microseconds. But they saw what they wanted to see. The quiet sister who'd settled for teaching. Did you hear about that new education technology everyone's talking about? Mark, Victoria's husband, suddenly asked. Some big announcement tomorrow. My hospital's looking into implementing it for resident training. Victoria rolled her eyes. Please, like some tech toy could replace real education. Besides, what do you know about it? Actually, Mark continued, scrolling through his phone, it's fascinating. They're saying it could revolutionize how we learn. Something about quantum computing and adaptive AI. Emma, this is more your speed, right? Being a teacher and all. I took a sip of water, hiding my smile. You could say that. Well, I think it's ridiculous, Victoria declared. Nothing can replace traditional teaching methods. This is probably just another Silicon Valley gimmick. Right, Emma? Before I could respond, the room filled with the sound of breaking news alerts. Everyone's phones went off simultaneously. Mom picked up her phone first, her eyes widening. Harvard University announces revolutionary breakthrough in educational technology. Historic $100 million grant awarded to... She stopped, staring at me. Victoria grabbed her own phone, her face draining of color as she read. Dr. Emma Mitchell, pioneering researcher and educator, awarded largest educational research grant in Harvard's history for groundbreaking quantum AI learning system. The silence in the room was deafening. But you're just a teacher, Victoria whispered. I stood up, straightening my jacket. I should go. I have an early morning tomorrow. Press conference at Harvard, you know how it is. I paused at the door. Oh, and Victoria? About that Carter Innovation Award nomination, congratulations. I was on the selection committee last year. It's quite an honor. The sound of another wine glass shattering behind me was particularly satisfying. The Harvard auditorium hummed with anticipation the next morning. Television cameras lined the back wall, and reporters from every major news outlet filled the seats. In the front row I spotted my family, Mom, Dad, and Victoria, all looking shell-shocked. They'd received VIP invitations at midnight, courtesy of President Richardson. Dr. Mitchell? My assistant handed me a tablet showing live social media feeds. Hashtag quantum education was trending worldwide. Time magazine wants an exclusive. And the Nobel Committee sent another email. I nodded, scanning the latest metrics from our pilot program. 10,000 students across 5 continents, all learning at unprecedented rates thanks to my AI system. Children in remote villages accessing Harvard-level education through quantum-powered tablets. Medical residents mastering complex procedures through adaptive simulation programs. President Richardson approached the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to announce what we believe is the single most important advancement in educational technology since the invention of the printing press. In the front row, Victoria shifted uncomfortably. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. 5 years ago, a brilliant young physicist approached me with an idea, Richardson continued. She suggested combining quantum computing with artificial intelligence to create an educational system that could adapt in real time to each student's unique learning pattern. Many called it impossible. Today we call it revolutionary. The screen behind him lit up with my research results. Graduation rates increased by 300%. Medical training time cut in half. Scientific breakthroughs accelerated through enhanced learning protocols. Please welcome to the stage the architect of this breakthrough, Harvard's newest full professor and recipient of our historic $100 million grant, Dr. Emma Mitchell. The applause was thunderous. As I walked to the podium, I caught Victoria's eye. For the first time in our lives, she was looking up at me. Education, I began, isn't about who's teaching. It's about how we learn. Every brain is unique. Every mind processes information differently. For too long, we've forced diverse minds into rigid learning patterns. The screens showed children in rural Africa mastering advanced physics through my AI interface. Medical students in Asia performing virtual surgery with quantum-enhanced precision. I chose to teach high school physics not because I couldn't do more, but because I needed to understand learning at its most fundamental level. My students weren't just teenagers learning equations. They were my research partners, helping me understand how different minds grasp complex concepts. In the front row, Mom was openly crying now. Dad looked like he couldn't decide whether to be proud or ashamed. Today, we're not just announcing a grant. We're announcing the democratization of knowledge. Harvard's entire curriculum, adapted in real time for each learner. Medical training accelerated through quantum simulations. Scientific research enhanced by AI-driven educational protocols. I paused, looking directly at Victoria. Every field, from neurosurgery to nuclear physics, will be transformed by how we teach and learn. The press conference lasted 2 hours. Reporters asked about the Nobel nomination, the pending patents, the billions in potential applications. Through it all, my family sat silently, processing the reality that the sister they'd pitted had quietly changed the world. Afterward, in my new Harvard office, they came to see me. Victoria spoke first. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" she asked quietly. I gestured to the wall of patents and awards, all earned quietly over the years. "Would you have listened?" She started, then stopped. "Well, probably not." Mom stepped forward, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. "All those times we criticized your choices taught me an important lesson," I finished. "Success doesn't need an audience to be real." "The hospital board wants to implement your system," Victoria said suddenly. They want you to train me to lead the medical education division." I smiled, remembering all the times she'd called me just a teacher. "I think," I said, picking up a quantum tablet, "that's a perfect place to start. Lesson 1. Everyone has something to learn and everyone has something to teach." As I began explaining the basics of quantum educational theory to my stunned sister, I caught our reflection in the office window. 2 successful women, each brilliant in her own way, finally meeting as equals. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving others wrong about you. It's proving yourself right about what you can achieve regardless of what they believe. And sometimes, just sometimes, those who dismissed you end up becoming your most dedicated students.